when I saw Nicolás Maduro, the president, doing a little dance,
Peleando, peleando, bailando, bailando y triunfando, triunfando.
I said, man, he's done.
What surprised me the most was just kind of the fact that the president actually went through with it.
It became a safe haven. Most of those little boats that were going up, were blowing up, were Tren de Aragua moving dope for the cartels. So we have a proximity issue that we don't have with the Middle East. I think that's what made Trump decide, if we don't do something about this, we're going to have some issues. Myself and a very small number worked on intel that was utilized for the op. We know for a fact, and I'm extremely confident, that the intel we provided helped fill a lot of great gaps. I'm proud that we did it. And for me, it's really about liberating people and allowing a country to be whole again.
We have 8 million displaced Venezuelans around the world, and you can see them celebrating because they get to go home now.
The current political and day-to-day structure of leadership has been removed. It seems like there's kind of three major centers, one in particular that seems to be the most likely that's going to, take the helm. Is there an objectively better person to take it over?
You have Rodriguez, the vice president. She holds the pen of power in Venezuela officially. The Estado holds the keys to the police departments, the intelligence, things on the streets. Corina Machado, she holds the people's hearts. But more importantly, she really cares about the country.
What do you think the current administration needs to do to effectively navigate that and make it happen with the least amount of collateral damage and blackening of the U.S. eyes to the Venezuelan people?
I think
I have 4 dogs, and they've eaten all types of different food, and we recently found Team Dog, I believe this spring, so we've been on it for a year. Seeger was on it first, and Tiller was on it, and then we put the Goldens on it, and I mean, all the dogs eat less food, the dogs' coats are way better. Everything about Team Dog is, I'm very impressed. My dog trainer, Justin Allen, he uses it on all 60 dogs that are there for training. He's tried every single food in the game too, and they just stay super healthy on this Team Dog.
Ladies and gentlemen, as always, it's both an honor and a pleasure to welcome my next guest back to the podcast. He was originally on just a few months ago, episode 255. He was a lead DEA agent in Venezuela, hence the quick return to the show. He's the author of Infiltrate America and has an upcoming book called Beyond Blurry Lines. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Wes Tabor.
Thanks for having me again, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for coming back so quick. Obviously, with the raid in Venezuela as of late and the extensive amount of time you spent both in the DEA and in the country, we wanted to come get your take on a lot of the behind the scenes and kind of inner workings of what led up to it, and I think just as important as the most recent few weeks is the multi-decades leading up to it that really set the stage for that to be a decision that the president made. I will say for me, it took me completely by surprise. I know that they had talked about it. We've been messing with some of their narco boats and stuff, and there'd been some hinting at hey, careful what you mess around with, etc. But I honestly was not expecting what happened to have happened. I don't know if that took you by surprise, but I'd love to kind of hear your initial thoughts on it, and then we'll kind of get into some of the notes you sent over.
When I saw, just before Christmas, I saw Nicolás Maduro, the president, doing a little dance with the music, peace, love, no war, that kind of thing. I said, man, he's done.
Really?
Yeah, he's done. Because, we have the whole flotilla out there waiting. How many millions is that a day just to maintain all those vessels out there that we can see, right? We subs, air assets, we have a variety of, you name it, we have it all, right? Millions and millions of dollars a day. And they were out there for, 2 months? And then you have this guy partying at Miraflores, their equivalent of the White House, like it's 1999, right? And he's no worries, no cares. And I could just see Trump in the White House, in the Oval Office, looking at the cameras going, okay, we'll see about that. And what happened?
Yeah.
And he pulled the trigger.
Yeah. So, I mean, what for you as somebody who has an extensive level of experience, both inside the country as well as working for an agency that's, kind of continually evaluating what's going on and intel gathering, et cetera, was it at all a surprise to you, or were you like, yeah, that figures?
So I was there 2010 to almost 2013. And I'd worked in Latin America in previous tours downrange, right? So I've been in Central America. I was a supervisory DEA agent assigned to CIA, embedded with them for 3 years as well. And I did Western Hemisphere-centric cases, right? So it wasn't a surprise for me. When I was there, it was 2010 to 2013. It was the end of the Hugo Chavez era, which is the guy that actually brought the socialism, eventual dictatorship to Venezuela, right? So when I left, then I started working with CIA. I was a DEA supervisory special agent assigned to them, embedded with them, working Western Hemisphere, centric cases. And I launched a lot out of the north coast of Colombia, right next to Venezuela. And then I worked maritime cases when I came up and had a 959 group in Miami. 959 group basically is working overseas cases that have a nexus point in the United States so we can charge them, right? And we were working, when I say we're working 60 metric tons in one case alone in hand that we seized. Wow. So we have vessels coming in with 10, 15, 25 tons of cocaine on them. And then have boat crews, which we're tracking, and then we interview all the people on the boat crews. My whole crew interviewed them. The guys were, studs. These guys are just, the case that they made, it got beat out for an Administrator's Award, which is the highest award DA gives, by a 10-pound meth case because of politics in the Midwest. Oh, but wow. It was incredible because it's one of the largest cocaine seizure cases that we had in DEA with respect to like Pan-X and things like that. They work a lot of these. Pan-X is a big conglomerate of FBI, DEA, Customs, and everything else, and they work a bunch of maritime cases as well, and we rivaled them. So, I stayed in the game of Venezuela in the back of my mind, even though I wasn't there, because, when you live somewhere, when you're doing all these things in country, and for me, I was there with people, and then I was alone for a period of time and doing these operations, and then, they had put contract on my life to kill me as well. So, for me, it was a personal thing as well as just, it wasn't just work,
right?
And so I was watching what was going on. I had a lot of sources still in Venezuela, and the whole time I started picking up the phone again, talking to people. Hey, what's going on in Venezuela specifically? Yeah. What can we get?
So I guess for me the surprise isn't so much from an operational plan or op plan or contingency standpoint. I know the Department of Defense and the U.S. government, generally speaking, has contingency kind of what if plans for just about every scenario that they can come up with, prioritizing the more likely ones. So, I'm not surprised that, that wasn't, a potential outcome or a strategy that we had, but we have that for Cuba, for Colombia, for everybody. What surprised me the most was just kind of the fact that the president actually went through with it, because the world stage aspect of it, and I know a lot of people kind of have the, hey, we're America, we're going to do whatever we want approach, which I don't particularly agree with. Having said that, strategically it makes a ton of sense. I have no doubt that there are a lot of potential benefits provided the aftermath is handled correctly, but it's a pretty ballsy move considering the amount of investment that China has, that Russia has, that the ties that Colombia has. There's Iran plays a role, and I also know there are tens of billions or even hundreds of billions of dollars owed to those countries in oil contracts that are now going to be defaulted. China just dumped billions of dollars into infrastructure and stuff, and it's basically throwing a middle finger to them. Given the kind of heartburn or territorial dispute over Taiwan with China, and the Russia-Ukraine stuff that we've been involved with, it seems like kind of Again, just a little bit out of left field, not necessarily in a bad way, just in a very surprising way. I guess that's what I'm the most surprised by, is that they, meaning the administration currently, actually went through with it and did it and pulled it off and what have you. Did that surprise you that they actually did it, though?
It didn't, and I'll tell you why. So for the last 30 years almost, we've seen a gradual increase in the curve of aggression and also repression of the people in Venezuela, right? So we have 38 million Venezuelans, 8 million of them fled the country. Then you have people that are trapped in that country. And then you have upwards of, some say, 18,000 political prisoners and more and counting. And by the way, they're locking people up still to this day, a lot of military officers, anyone they thought that could be providing comfort to the enemy or anything. And you know how these things go in some of these countries, like, oh, he got a haircut, yesterday. Oh, he must be guilty. He's a witch. Throw him into prison, right? And they're locking these guys up left and right. My information is probably in the last week or so, they locked up over 1,000 military officers. So this is continuing. And when I say they lock them up, these guys are, starved. They starve them. They torture them. They do a myriad of things to them and their families. So the situation in Venezuela, obviously everyone knows the economic collapse and so forth. But when you have the ingress of all these proxy actors, like, for example, Hamas, right? Hamas comes in, ties, obviously, the proxy of Iran. But in this time, we had the actual IRGC soldiers on the ground. We have a drone factory that's on the ground producing drones, and they call them kamikaze drones. So what they had planned on doing, they weren't sure if they were going to do this or not, but this is what we were hearing, is launch these drones and just run them into the ships and blow them up, kamikaze drones, right? So, but then you have the FARC and ELN in Colombia, and these are all those freedom-fighting, cocaine, manufacturing and growing entities. They all came over to get in the fight too, right? So you have the president of Colombia, Petro. This guy was an old guerrilla from M19. And let me tell you something about this guy too, right? The stories that I'm hearing about this guy, and I'm assuming most of them are accurate. I'm just going to say it because everyone knows, and he's self-admitted to being this M19 guerrilla. Some of these hostages, because that's how they would make money back in the day, they would grab a hostage, put him in, some remote camp somewhere, just like the FARC does. This guy would defecate on those prisoners, on those hostages that were tied up and stuff. And he'd make fun of them and do all this stuff. So urinating, defecating, all that, this is the kind of person that eventually, fast forward 30 years ahead, and now he's obviously, I left that world behind, that's not me. But socialism is great. What can we do? He runs for mayor of Bogota. He wins. He does that. The masses love him. He wants to give everyone a free refrigerator as well, right? And then next thing you know, he runs for president. And look what we have now. So the geopolitical, South American game table is shifting. We just had a Chilean Communist Party run in Chile against a right-leaning candidate. And luckily, they missed by about 20%. But they still got about 80%, toward their goal. So it's still, obviously we call it a red country. But so the landscape of what was happening was we're shifting into this potential socialistic move. And then you have China, Russia, Iran, and others, Syrian entities and the proxies and so forth, these guerrilla movements, they're all converging and they're all growing. And this isn't even talking, now we're not even talking about the colectivos. You've heard about colectivos, which are basically, I call them the Antifa of Venezuela streets, okay? They're a lot more dangerous than that. They're a lot more organized, a lot more violent than Antifa, but their goals and means are the same thing you would kind of think about Antifa, right? Yeah. And then you have Tren de Aragua, which is the gang that was formed in Aragua State, and they were working directly. Most of those boats, and people don't know this, most of those little boats that were going up, were blowing up, were Tren de Aragua moving dope for the cartels. And guess who they were working for directly? Maduro's son. And the money was flowing back up to Celia Flores and Nicolás Maduro himself. Yeah. So you get the whole picture here. It's a lot going on. It's a lot to unpack. But I think that's what made Trump decide, if we don't do something about this, we're going to have some issues.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly understand that. I guess what's forced me to dig deeper and really kind of look at, whether it's the connections with, or justification rather, with the Monroe Doctrine, and thinking of it more from a hemispherical strategic standpoint, it makes a lot more sense. But, for me, what I think caught me off guard the most was that you could say that same kind of, issue with so many other countries all over the planet that have horrible dictators that, are oppressing the people to a terrible degree, civil rights, human rights violations up and down, crooked governments, funneling of drugs, terrorist sponsored, state actors, et cetera, that we don't do that for, and it wasn't until I really kind of started to dig in and see the connections of, how much oil they supply to China and some of these other kind of bigger picture, more global or geopolitical kind of implementations that really seems like it triggered that. It still kind of took me off guard. But I am curious, in your time on the ground there, as well as subsequently, have those ties been something that, from a DEA and investigative standpoint, are those things that you guys would look at, identify, and would contribute to any of the casework, or was it just strictly the narcotics stuff? Because obviously the DEA focuses on narcotics, but because of the kind of woven web that exists with kind of the influence that China has in our hemisphere via Venezuela, is that something that you guys paid much attention to, or was it pretty singularly focused on the narcotics element?
Yeah, for me, it was a priority, actually. So, I had a couple different priorities, right? So when I went there, the office had shrunk from about 30, 35 guys to like 2 people.
Oh, wow.
And one was going out the door, okay? So when I was there, I had a visa issued, and I just, like, the next couple days, it was like 2 or 3 days later, I went to country, because we were losing a lot of ground and a lot of issues on the ground that we just didn't have anyone there, right? And so, and how effective can one person be, right? So, well, that you can weigh that, and there's a lot of effectiveness that can, for the right person, right, in the right time and all the things, with a great team of people in the U.S. supporting them, right? And we did accomplish that. But we wanted to get HVT ops up and running. We wanted to get all these guys that were hiding from the North Via cartel and other cartels and all these bad actors. We even got a guy that killed 2 police officers in the Dominican Republic. We wanted to get these guys because it became a safe haven. Venezuela became a safe haven, okay? So you could have a guy like Beto Marin, North Via cartel kingpin. He was hiding out in Venezuela for years, just enjoying himself, because all he had to do is drop some money in the pockets of the Venezuelan National Police and the politicians, and they left him alone. And that's what was going on with dozens and dozens of these bad actors, right? So that was priority for me. I really wanted to get some of these guys, because some of them had hurt Americans. I mean, all of them were moving dope almost. And, in the last decade, we've had, 1.3 million people die of overdoses. So, but this is going back to 2010. It hadn't reached that level of crises that kind of led up to where we are today. But it was more than just, the dope side, because I remember we would have meetings in a certain jurisdiction in the U.S. for prosecution. And I was jumping up and down. This is material support terrorism. This is what we have. We have all these different statutes we can employ. We need to do it. They didn't want to do it. I'm like, why don't you want to do it? It's clear and convincing. And maybe there were some other agencies that didn't want to cross into. Maybe they didn't want to do whatever. I don't know, right? They weren't telling us. But I'll tell you this. I was pushing for it. And when you look at the current indictment, you have like importing of machine guns and things like this, kind of strange, kind of like little indictment segments where you're like, why are they doing this? Why wouldn't they do a blanket material support terrorism or something like that? And I think they have specific information, obviously, from either debriefing or undercover operation or whatever it is. I don't know. I'm just surmising. And they said, you know what? Each of these charges is going to be like 5 or 10 years. And when you put 3, 4, or 5 of these on there, along with all the narcotics violations and the conspiracy and everything, the guy's looking at like 100 years,
Yeah.
So, but But for us in the United States, 1,300 miles off the coast, Miami, where I'm from, right? So Miami, we have, and they're putting up, Russian-made rockets. It's almost like it harkened back to, this is current, harkened back to what you do in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Like they're starting to put arms, bigger arms. The Chinese are coming in with their electronic, blockers and scanners and all this other stuff. They're doing what they do against us. And don't forget, they've revitalized what was going on in Puerto Rico with the movements through the Caribbean, right? So what did we do? We opened up the base in Puerto Rico. My friends in Puerto Rico are loving it. They're like, man, you know what this is doing for our economy? I was like, that's wonderful. But, some of the Puerto Rican property there is only about 400 or less miles away from Venezuela. So we have a proximity issue that we don't have with the Middle East.
Right.
And then with the growth and the acceleration of what they were doing, and then like you said, listen, billions of dollars in oil that's owed. We're denying all that income and payback, right? So we're kind of doing this. And don't forget, just the day before, China was there greeting Nicolás Maduro.
Yeah.
And then we struck the next day. I mean, you don't get a bolder act than that.
No, yeah, like I said, it was incredibly ballsy, and I'm actually kind of surprised that China hasn't been more reactive to it, and maybe they're playing the long game, and that maybe that gave them the green light to try to take Taiwan. Who knows? But I am curious, in your time actually on the ground there, now granted this was, well over a decade ago, but even then, a lot of the things that are in place there now, in terms of economic and state ties to Russia and China particularly, did you ever see any evidence of that back then, where there were either Russian nationals or Chinese nationals that kind of came into the web of focus of what you were working on?
100%.
Really?
Yeah. I can't go into some of it, but I'll tell you this. For example, when they talk about the Cuban interface that exists in Venezuela, I would be followed by Cuban G2 surveillance teams, and other people would be followed. But it wasn't just in Venezuela. I would go, when I would do meets, I would do multiple country, like I would skip US, another country, change airlines, the whole thing, right? Like, so I wouldn't be followed, because I was being followed everywhere I went there. And it actually extended into other locations. So I remember we had 2 agents come from Miami division to meet me in a country in Central America. I'll just leave it at that. And we landed on the ground, and I had skipped around. Like, I flew like to Chicago, I flew like to Houston, got on another plane, and then I flew into Central America, right? And as we're going to do a meeting of a certain source, we were doing some checks first, and we picked up that we were being followed. And come to find out, that was actually Cuban intelligence that was on us, when myself and 2 other agents. And they're like, holy shit, this is like real. You were telling us like we had to be careful about this, but because the guys in the States don't experience this.
Yeah.
They're not being followed by Cubans. They're not being followed by Russians. They're not being followed by Iranians and things like that. That was pretty much common for me in country in Venezuela. But, I had information too. It wasn't just state actors. I had one narco that was actually employing a technical expert to get into all my devices. So, how can we get in his phone? How can we get in his email? How can we do all this stuff? And of course, I'm juggling 8 to 12 cell phones a month. We're rotating them. My secretary would bring them in, dip pouch, so that we could keep devices clean. And then I'd chop them up. I talked about this before. We'd chop them up in my office. And I'd go out at night, throw pieces over bridges as I'm driving around, So we were very aware of what was going on. And we were even more aware of the nexus between the Cartel de los Soles, which is the structure that I think our U.S. government is kind of saying doesn't exist now. It exists, but whatever. They want to change whatever they're calling this cartel or whatever. Now they're calling it the Venezuelan government. I don't know. But I'll tell you this, because I wrote a book about it. I talk about the Cartel de los Soles. I talk about the Colectivos, Tren de Aragua, all of the movements within Venezuela and what happens when they leave Venezuela, and how they really, how many people, 20, 30, women that were killed in the United States from these savages that were raping and killing, like Lake and Riley, things like that. So the consequences were very, very real. And I recognized it back then. Many of us did. And we tried to get interventions. And we did make some great leads. And we did do some good things because, you know, here's the thing. I wasn't just representing DEA. I had prosecutors calling me from HSI, Secret Service. I had, you name it, FBI. If I had an HVT I could grab, I would grab it. I didn't care who it represented. I think I picked up maybe 3 or 4 HSI HVTs for them.
Oh, wow.
And we flew them on DEA aircraft. So this wasn't like, you know, Tango Mio. This is not, you know, DEA and I don't want anyone else. This was across the whole government board. Anything I needed to share with another agency, we shared. The FBI guys that were with me in Caracas, they really weren't allowed to go out and do a lot of things, but they were awesome when we would talk and we'd strategize for stuff, or I needed help or I needed advice or whatever it would be. Same thing with the HSI guys. Same thing with State Department. State Department was excellent. So we all recognized the threat. I think on the state side, and this is where it gets sticky, you have the Department of State. Some of the people in the Department of State, you know, they're so hyper-focused on the politics of things that oftentimes they'll kind of look away on what's really going on. And that, I won't get into it too much, but that happened quite often. You know, we would hear of these kind of like games that were going on. I say games, they shouldn't call them a game, but it was a game. Who gives the most visas this month to Venezuelans, like on the consular line? And they would get an award, like a fake award, like they'd give them at a lunch, you know, they'd give them an award like, you know, you gave the most Venezuelan visas out, you know, to go to Gringolandia. Well, man, everyone wanted out back then. So where do you think these people ended up? They overstayed. They didn't come back to Venezuela.
Yeah.
You know? So, yeah, we knew it, but you can only do so much. And now looking in the rearview mirror, we could see that drastic curve of threat and danger that brought us to this occasion.
Wow. I am curious. You mentioned the, you know, predominantly being Cubans that were following you around, and I read in multiple sources that that Maduro's immediate security team was Cuban and not Venezuelan, and I understand the lack of trust. But why Cubans? Do you know why there's such a tight or close-knit relationship with Cuba in particular?
Yeah. So when you look at the principles of what Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro thought, right? They were the same cloth, the same mindset. Number one, they hate America, right? We are going to overtake because socialism is going to, you know, that's the world order that we want. Cuba did it with Russia. They manipulated Russia. They did really a fantastic job to maintain their position. Then they kind of gave them the Heisman later on to now because their relationship with Russia and Cuba is not that great. And look at that little tiny island still existing, you know, underneath the rule of that family, the Castro family and so forth. It's loosened up on some stuff, right? But that same ideological belief exists in Venezuela with these leaders. But what started out as this ideological kind of meeting of the minds between Cuba and Venezuela turned into, how can I enrich myself? How can the Cartel de los Soles kind of advance? And then it turned from just narco-trafficking money, because they're flooding the United States and destroying the social fabric of our country. That was a big goal that they shared with Cuba. But also, they're enriching themselves. And enriching themselves, they also created a safe haven. So it wasn't just, you know, they weren't being like a lapdog of Cuba, but they shared these same values. And because they had the oil, because they had been prosperous, and I say had been, because it was like, you know, back in the 50s, the third richest country in the world. And it declined to the point where, you know, the Bolivar Fuerte, which is their money, like you could have like, you know, 15 million of that and you couldn't even buy a, you know, a candy bar if they had candy bars, you know?
Yeah.
So that's kind of, you know, when you think about it, that meeting of the minds is what really propelled them forward together.
Yeah. When you were there, did you see a lack of trust specifically of Maduro and the Venezuelan military then, or is that something that transpired closer to now?
Going back, as soon as Cuba started sending military liaisons, those liaisons then became people that took command. So you would have Venezuelan colonels or generals answering to potentially even a captain or a light colonel from the Cuban military, because they wanted that wall, that buffer, to make sure that they had someone doing an overwatch on their own people. They didn't want, someone to turn in someone or do something or turn into a spy or something like that. So the Cubans were there to make sure that the line was towed, right? Yeah. And when you talk, about the bodyguards and all those things, I'm not going to get into it too much, but, you have all these Cuban guys that died. And you have, Nicolás Maduro, he wasn't injured, right?
The hat on the coffee table sitting right in front of me belonged to Glenn Doherty. It was a John Deere hat that I gave him. He had it when he tragically passed in Benghazi. BUBS Naturals is a tribute to Glenn. They have collagen peptides, which I put into my morning routine every single morning, as well as the functional creamer / MCT oil that goes into it as well. They have hydrate or dielectric electrolyte drink mixes, which are great for pre-workout, during workout, and post-workout to get all the added sodium, potassium, magnesium, et cetera, that's required when you deplete it. BUBS is a family company. The way that they started is, again, super close to my heart, with him being one of my closest friends for a long time. And I encourage you to go to bubs.com, and now there's a landing page specifically for Mic Drop listeners. Just enter the code MIKE, M-I-K-E, all caps, and you get 20% off your first purchase at bubsnaturals.com. So that's www.bubsnaturals.com/Mike. And you can check out the Mic Drop landing page and go support an amazing cause.
So bodyguards are with the principal, okay? So you have all the bodyguards that are dead, but Nicolás Maduro is unscathed. So that's kind of a question that I have, when I look at it. And they said that this is what they were saying, that he couldn't get in the bunker. They grabbed him in time before it was shut, but they were prepared to breach the bunker and so forth. So it would be interesting to see later on when this comes out, the precision of these Delta guys, and I think they're just saying brag, but everyone has come out now and they're saying, hey, listen, this is Delta, right? And then the lift guys were, probably 160 or whatever. So, but when they went in, could they have been that precise? I guess they maybe could have, but, they did a great job, and no one could ever top what they did.
Is that to imply that there was potential insider info from the actual local Venezuelan military members or, host native Venezuelans that gave insight as to where the immediate Cuban forces were? Is that kind of what you're implying without saying it?
I think the potential to kind of destroy a Cuban element that's inside could have been something that they saw as an opportunity, or it was just the movement was they felt he was going to be safe at that moment, and they were separated from the principal to an extent when Delta came in, and I'm sure they had a great overwatch. I mean, the ISR they had and everything they had was just, you don't want to go up against these guys, right? You're going to lose every time. Right. I mean, I think one of the choppers took some fire, small arms fire, and that's it. And the guys had some shrapnel, and they were okay. I mean, talk about a success. We lost 27 guys in Operation Just Cause in Panama. Here, nothing.
Yeah. I mean, the tactical efficiency and accuracy and lethality that was exhibited by the United States in Venezuela is about as textbook as you can get. I mean, it was a flawless and incredibly impressive operation, no two ways about it. If we could, I'd love to get kind of a handle on the full understanding of essentially where things are right now, kind of the backstory on between Chavez and the turnover to Maduro, and kind of how it got to where it is now, key players and your role in it along the way, before we get into kind of more current events as it's unfolding.
Well, when I was there, this was still Hugo Chavez running the show, right? So you have the founder of the movement, not the founder of socialism, obviously, but the Chavista movement in Venezuela. And what he was doing was going back in like 1993, 1992, when he had been imprisoned because he attempted a coup, and then they forgave him and let him out. Why would you do that? I don't know, but it totally ditched the country after that, because he came back, he became a political member, got a following, ended up winning the election by a landslide, because what was he doing? He was pulling the old, everyone will have a house underneath me, because we have all the oil, we have all the riches, I'm going to give everything to everyone. You're going to have a refrigerator and a home. And remember, 90% of that country is just impoverished. 85 to 90% of the people in the country are just barely making meal to meal, right? And you have, the projects there where they're just killing and robbing, and it's a very dangerous place. Caracas is a very dangerous place. And when you go out into the rural areas, it's even worse, right? So you get a guy coming in saying, listen, we have billions and billions and billions a year we're producing in oil. I'm going to share it with you. They were like, vote him in. But like everything with socialism that leads into communism, when they get in power, then the narrative starts changing up, right? So that's when I was coming in. He was still saying, I'm going to give you a home. He was still saying, I'm going to give you a refrigerator, but he wasn't doing it, right? And so we knew that now the FARC was moving, multiple tons of cocaine through Venezuela. We had FARC members and different terrorists from different groups hiding in Venezuela. And we knew that their association was not just a business relationship. They actually had the same mindset. We're going to flood the United States. We're going to do this. We're going to be rich. We're going to use the country of Venezuela to capitalize on safe haven from all these people from around the world. You have to remember, Tarek al-Assaimi, who's one of the generals of the Cartel of Solis, when I was there, he was the Minister of Justice. His father's an old Baathist from Iraq, and he grew up in an environment that was very anti-American, and he is a true terrorist. You can Google him. And he's technically in jail in Caracas, but there's a $15 million reward for him, $10 or $15 million reward for him. And I've met him. I was the only agent to have met him that I'm aware of, right? This guy is very reclusive within Venezuela. He had all the contacts. He was the governor of Aragua when Tren de Aragua rose up. So think about that for a minute. So my information that I have is you have Tarek el-Assaimi, who's the governor of Aragua, and all of a sudden you have Tren de Aragua enriching themselves through extortion and everything they do, right? And then you have them starting to spread out around Latin America, and they become part of this whole socialistic fabric as well, in a sense. And where do you think some of that money was going? Back to Tarek el-Assaimi. And when you look at some of the earlier documentation coming out of the White House and out of DOJ, they mentioned Tarek el-Assaimi and Tren de Aragua together. They don't go into the details, but you can kind of surmise like, oh, that's interesting, right? That's what I did. I didn't have all this information. This is after I've been retired and started researching and looking with my knowledge of Venezuela. So, it kind of moved in the direction where you had, now when I got there, the highest level of people. Later on, Tarek became the vice president of Venezuela. But what happened in 2011 was you have Hugo Chavez diagnosed with cancer. And where was he going for treatment? Cuba, of all places, because Cuba's got the best treatment for severe stage 4 cancer, of course. Why wouldn't you? Everyone wants to go to Cuba, right? So he's going to Cuba. He's getting ready to check out. But before he checks out, he says to Nicolás Maduro, you are the one. And all the Chavistas are like, oh, he's the one. And they just accepted it, right? But then you have to have an election at some point. Constitution of Venezuela, you have to require an election. So they're concerned now, right? And this is where you have the information coming about the voting machines, all the election fraud that took place, the machines that were all programmed. And then you have all the hype about, did they mess with the machines? What did they do? The election was a fraud, and this is all clearly stated in a lot of documentation coming out of the White House. I'm in there just before this happened. So I'm Chavez just before Maduro, but Maduro was the vice president actually at that time. Okay. So it was, it was a crazy time because you have it's like being in Cuba with Castro. And I was kind of fortunate in that sense to be there at that time.
Wow. Once that transfer of power, Hugo passes away and Maduro takes over, was there a noticeable shift in how things went, or was it more of a passing of the torch and he was just continuing what Chavez had started?
He was just continuing.
Yeah.
And what made it worse was the relationship between USA and Venezuela had broken down. The diplomatic relationship broke down even more. And eventually the embassy closed and we had no one. And they just spent $100 million or whatever, I don't know what it was, 80 million or whatever it was, building a new Marine house on those grounds for the Marines. So all this is done, and then, we pull out, and then we do the outside-in approach with DEA, where we're on the outside, guys from all the field divisions and SOD and headquarters, they're all working these cases. DEA needs to do a better job in coordination. I'll tell you a story. So you'll have a guy that's working a case, true story, and he might have a super informant, like super duper informant, and you will help this guy get where he wants to go out of the country or in the country later, but he has to kind of earn his bones, right? And he might not be a bad guy. You could have a bad guy, you could have a doper who wants to flip, you could have a government person that wants to flip, you could have an intelligence person wants to flip, or a policeman, whatever, right? And not all of them are bad. Some of them are like, I don't want your money. This is my country. This is what they're doing to it. I want to help you. And in one case in this was that. And we had people from another division of DEA approach this person, this source, unbeknownst to the agent that was running him. And they said, you come work for us. If you don't come work for us, we're going to throw you back to Venezuela where you're going to die. Okay? So you need to leave what you're doing over there and come on this team. And yeah, we're all DEA, but you come work for us, not for him. And when I heard that story and it's confirmed, I was just like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, you have an act of extortion in essence. It's actually a crime. If this guy would have pushed it, he could have had a huge OIG investigation and potential criminal charges. You're going to take a guy that wants to come forward, provide, do the right thing and help you, and then you have an internal struggle and fight, and instead of working with that other district, you have people that go to him and say, yeah, you're going to throw you back if you don't work with us. Yeah. Those are the kinds of things that stall the investigations. Those are, and unfortunately, Mike, this happens a lot. It happens, a lot of undercutting.
Well, and that's, not even just division or department-wide. I mean, that's across the entire U.S. government. I mean, there's always baffling cases of that. Taking one step back, so when Maduro took over for Chavez, were you in country when that happened?
No, I had just left.
You just left.
He was the vice president, so he was in place. Everything was ready.
Yeah. Did you ever meet him?
No.
Never met him. I assume that in working that element and it being one of the notes I have is a C pod, it got classified as a consolidated priority organization target. I guess, in working in and around there then, were there contacts that were close to him that you ever sourced or that you were ever in contact with, or like how close were you to the eagle's nest, if you will, of the Venezuelan government?
So I can't get into the details of some of that. I was working with different individuals that were at the top of the food chain, like at the very, very top, right? So, and sometimes I would get assistance, sometimes I wouldn't. Sometimes those same individuals might be the ones that want to kill me, right? So, it wasn't like, it's not like a linear kind of movement here. You're dealing with psychopaths, you're dealing with criminals that are in a governmental office, and you could have like the head of an organization number 4 or 5 or 6 of the country, and you're meeting with this person, and everything's going great, and you think that you're making an inroad, and then next thing you know, you find out that they actually are trying to set you up to be robbed, or an accident or something like that. So it's not like you're dealing with a normal environment.
Well, yeah, I mean, so that makes me curious, obviously it's, on paper it's a government. It's more like a mob or a narco-terrorist organization. How blurry were those lines of, in your time there under Chavez, like how governmental was it actually, like, if at all, or was it strictly like a mob-run narco-trafficking group? I mean, was there a governmental side, or was it just kind of Wild West?
It was both, right? So it depend on what you were doing and what your communication was and who you were getting the actual behind the scenes from. So if you had a trusted source and you were talking to that trusted source or getting information from that source, they would give you a readout of maybe a meeting that you had a week before. And they're like, yeah, that meeting that you had, like when they got done, they're like, oh, we got to find a way to kill this guy. How are we going to kill this guy without getting jammed up, killing a diplomat in another country? So, but on the face of it, the government buildings, the meetings, I had a meeting with very high level people, okay, with some operators. I won't say who they were, whether they're military, police, intelligence, whatever. There were a small group of operators, and there were like 15 of them. And I was meeting with a super high level general. I'll just say that. Out of there's hundreds of units there. And when I walked into that room, and it was an official government building, official government office area, and I walked in looking at these people that were in the room, and the way they were looking at me, like I was the target. There was no question. And these guys, like, they weren't good guys. These guys, the information I had was they just go around, kidnap and kill people, right? But they were an official contact node that I had to go through to do certain things, right? Now, I knew, in my mind, I knew exactly what they were made up. I knew that what they wanted to do. I knew everything about them. But I had to actually utilize those contacts in some effort to do things that I had to get done, or the appearance thereof, right?
Right. So with that, I mean, the Hollywood portrayal of the kind of Scarface, almost caricature, type lifestyle, how close was, the contacts that you had and what you saw there in terms of the Chavez and ultimately Maduro government conducting themselves in that fashion? Was it very similar to that, or is that kind of an over-representation?
No. So, for example, if I would affect a capture of an HVT, and I won't get into it too much because some of the cases are still active. I can't get into too awful much, but we would utilize different people to affect certain things in a domino effect where all of a sudden these people were getting arrested, and then they were getting arrested, but then it was televised, and they had nowhere to go with it. They're like, oh shit, what are we gonna do? This guy's on TV, right? And then they had to admit, like, we got him. And at the same time, and this is just before Chavez died, he was trying to show the world that he was combating narco-terrorism, right? Narco crimes and so forth. So they wanted to arrest certain people, but not the big ticket ones that were paying $250,000, $300,000 a month to be free. They wanted to grab the chumps, right? Well, Beto Marin was not a chump, just one example. And you can go and you can Google Beto Marin, deportation Venezuela, and there's a video on there where I have a mask on, and I'm receiving them from the official Interpol agents that were on the ground, right? And a lot of people say, oh, Interpol, it's out of Europe, and they're all over the world. Well, all they do is give the name Interpol, and they almost like task force officers. So every country is going to have an Interpol liaison people, right? And then they nominate them almost like a task force person. So you have a police officer in Venezuela that's working for Interpol, but he's just a Venezuelan policeman. Yeah. But he'll have his Interpol uniform and all this other stuff, right? So I'd receive them from that. When you go look at that, to your question, is the government face that they show in all of those transfers are very professional. You have Tarek El-Assaimi, the Minister of Justice, later became the Vice President, just like Nicolás Maduro. but he had a falling out with Nicolás Maduro, and that's why they put him in jail. And you'll see the procession, all the soldiers lined up, the Guardia Nacional, which is like their National Guard. They're like an element of the police force in Venezuela. Then you have the CICPC, the National Police. They're there, and they have this big, microphone, and they read off the charges. We caught this guy, or we did this, and it was all BS, pretty much. They're taking the credit for many things they just didn't do, or they just went to the guy's house because he has no more money left. And they're like, I know you've been here for like 15 years hiding out from authorities, but you don't have any money left. So you're coming with us, right? And then they would bring him, turn him over to us and say, this is a big North Valle cartel guy, and we're giving him to you because we went out and found him and captured him. Well, and then I debriefed the guy, and he's like, yeah, they used to torture the shit out of me. They took everything, my car, my clothes, my TV. He goes, I had nothing left to give them. So then they throw me on the plane with you guys. He goes, get me the hell out of here. I'm over it, right? Yeah. But yeah, you could see the ceremony that they would do. And then, when I'd go to meetings as well, I would meet with, I probably met 7 or 8 of the Cartel de los Solos at the highest level, right?
Well, did you see in that kind of upper echelon level of government officials that darker side? I know you mentioned that kind of on its face it seemed, or the goal was to portray it as a legit government entity, but there's the underside, or the dark side of it. Did you see that kind of crazy partying and almost the Chapo style lifestyle of a lot of these guys? Did they have that kind of dual role where their personal lives were crazy, and coke parties and strippers and that kind of stuff? Did you see much of that?
So I didn't see, because I didn't socialize with them like that. So what I did was I would meet with them officially, or try to meet with them officially, right? So one example I'll give you is a person of very, very, very high rank, like some of the highest rank you can get. And it took me over a year to have a meeting with him. And the first meeting I was going to have with him, he was so afraid to meet me that I was going to put a hood over my head, be put in a trunk, and smuggled to a place where he was comfortable to meet me. And I actually was willing to do it.
Did he know that you were an American DEA agent?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That's why the secrecy involved in the meeting had to be like crazy. And for me to get in a trunk with a hood, and all, it's pretty crazy. So I actually went to a meeting location where they were supposed to pick me up, and I had a gun hidden in my pants deep down, like kind of like where you have the string and pull it up and the whole thing, right? And I'm like, what the fuck am I doing here? So, but I was like, if I'm this guy, like, I can't say his name, but it was super important, and he controlled many things. I mean, the knowledge about terrorism, the knowledge about drugs, the knowledge about the regime, the personal knowledge of the highest Chavez and Maduro and everyone, right? So I said, this is worth it. So I'm waiting, and then all of a sudden the door opens up and guys come in with rifles. And I'm thinking, okay, well, yeah, I was going to pull my gun actually. And I'm like, if I'm going to go, I'm going to take a couple guys with me. I mean, they hit me with that AK-47, I'm done. I'm not even going to get a draw, right? But I mean, you know how your mind thinks. You're just like, oh shit, And then I realized they weren't coming at me. They actually spread out, and they took the perimeter of the room. And I saw another high-ranking person smiling like this with a gun in his pants, walking at me, and I'm like, okay, don't pull your gun now. I think I'm good here, right? And what they did was they decided to come to me and not actually bring me and smuggle me in. They wanted to surprise me. So, and then I had a meeting for several hours, and that was one of my first meetings with an extremely high-level person.
Wow. Obviously, there's a lot of dicey stuff, and one of the things that we've seen kind of come out since the raid, a lot of eyewitness accounts and kind of testimony from people who historically for decades now have been silenced, and they're none of these details or few of these details have been able to get out on a large scale, but that talks about really intense torture and kidnapping and and things of that nature. Was there ever evidence that you came across personally in your time there or subsequently where you saw that?
Yeah, actually, so I went out to do an operation. I won't get into details. I was alone, so I did. For a time, I was alone for a long time, and then at the end of my tour, I had an agent, a very well trusted agent, actually brother of one of my old bosses. I don't talk names unless they reach out to me, like, you can use the names and stuff. My boss, my old boss, his name's Scott Ando. He doesn't care. He's like, whatever. I just don't talk about the other people, especially if they're active. And we had this discussion a while ago with my boss, because he's like, yeah, I saw you talking, but you didn't mention whatever. I said, I just don't like to talk about guys that aren't like giving me the thumbs up and so forth and whatever. So we had great people, but there was a time when I was doing a lot of this stuff by myself, and we just don't do that as agents. Typically as DEA agents, you don't go out by yourself. It's against policy. I would pay people, and I had to write memos. They had to do all these reviews and checks and all this stuff. We're just not built for that. Everything is by twos, right? Or threes or 15. And so for me, being on the ground there on this one operation, I actually pretended to be a source of a very high-ranking official. And that high-ranking official had me in his vehicle, okay? His guys thought that I was an actual Venezuelan source because I had a mask on. I had a gun, and I had a beacon and all that stuff, but it was very thin, and I had planned routes. Like, if it goes bad, how can I get out? Primary, secondary, tertiary, maritime, land. Can I get to the embassy? Maybe not. It was just one of those things where, like, if it breaks bad, it's going to be really freaking bad, right? The op fell apart at the end. I actually drew my gun on the guy. He was going to draw. He had a machine gun between his legs. He was going to draw that, but I was in the back seat. He's like, "What are you doing?" Long story short, after the Mexican standoff, the radio went crazy. They said they had the target. It wasn't the target. We converged. I got there, and they're just beating the hell out of this guy. And it's not even the right guy. It's not even the right guy. He had nothing to do with anything, right? And they're like, "This is him." And I'm like, "Yeah, nah, that's not him." And so later on, what I found out is they tortured the hell out of this guy for weeks and weeks and weeks before they let him go, because they wanted to try to get some money. So that was one time that I actually had personal knowledge of it. And what I was fearful of that night was that if they found out, or all these other guys, because they're all just straight up savage killers, that really in the end, yeah, they wear badges or they wear insignias or uniforms, but they're really just criminals, And so, yeah, these guys, this is what they do. Yeah. Everything's always about getting money.
Well, and so with that, I'm curious, how cartels rise to that level of power in a country where they essentially take over the government. Is it solely or purely about they get to a certain level of financial capacity where it enables them to do that? Is it a grassroots movement that they get kind of pseudo-elected to it because they're good enough bullshit artists and support the local communities enough with putting some money from narco trafficking back into it that they get that kind of support? Like, if you could try to help myself and the viewer/listener understand how that happens, because obviously it's not a forceful thing. They didn't have stage an actual military coup and forcefully take over the government. They kind of wove themselves in. How does that happen?
Well, if you look historically and you watch the videos of Pablo Escobar, and how benevolent he was. He was always building parks, schools, giving money. The people loved him. When he was killed, when Steve Murphy and Javier Pena worked that case, finally, two DEA agents, very famous DEA agents, Steve's a good friend of mine. When they took him down, the crowds came out crying and, oh my God, just thousands and thousands. And he had killed thousands of police officers. He took down an aircraft. He blew up 137 individuals in that aircraft. He was a horrible person. He was the first major cocaine trafficker that controlled the country, right? but he was more benevolent to the population, or what they'll say in Spanish, like el pueblo, right?
Folks, just a quick heads up. I do have a Team Dog Patreon tier where I answer questions via video, either just describing the answer to the question or even demonstrating some of it. So go to our Mic Drop Patreon page, check out the Team Dog tier, and I look forward to seeing you in there. Thank you much.
Well, in Venezuela, it wasn't about getting rich to begin with. It was this ideological concept of Cuba and all of their transference of, hey, you know what? You could turn this very wealthy country into something that would be the idol of the world, right? So you take all the money, invest it, and put it, and we can show the gringos, because they always hate the gringos. They always talk about the gringos. Chavez did all the time. And we will be the envy of the world. And everyone will want to be like us. But deep down, they know, and the Cubans knew this, and really Chavez did too. The bottom line is to capture a country by whatever means possible. And you might help a little bit at first, but all roads end with, okay, we would like to have this. Well, we'll buy it from you. It's a farm. It's a business. It's a whatever in the socialist ideal, right? We'll give you fair market price, to eventually where they're putting the gun at you and they're saying, you're going to give it to us. We're going to take it. Or we're just going to kill everyone. So this is just the way it's going to happen. So they used a combination of that ideological kind of concept and what they were doing, but then they also, as they started seeing the income they could generate and the riches they could generate and being protected by the state-backed efforts, that their country, who's going to come and invade the country? They never thought or dreamt, and we didn't, for 30 years. They enjoyed that freedom, and they just kept stacking on the charges. I say stacking on the charges. They kept creating more and more criminal elements. Tren de Aragua, the colectivos, the narcos. Now we have state actors coming in, setting up shop, where they have, in Venezuela, there was a Russian base that only Russians could go on.
I didn't.
Yeah. And they have the drone factory, the Iranian drone factory, the kamikaze drone factory, that, and then you have the Chinese, the embassy there. I would drive by that embassy. I actually lived right down the road from the Iranian embassy. And I would see the cars coming in there all the time. I'd always go drive by and take note of the plates in the cars and everything, And sometimes I would see those guys following me, and it was, just whatever. But, and then they started saying, we can have these relationships with all. And it all merged into a culmination that we're at now. And they used force. In the end, it all came down to force and brainwashing. I remember driving in my car, and they would come over like, a moment of silence, we're going to have the Comandante Chavez is going to speak. And I'm like, oh, man. Because at first I didn't realize. I'm like, ooh, I turn it up, Guy talked for 5 or 6 hours. And he took over every channel, AM, FM, street, you name it. He took up TV, cable, because eventually he got rid of all the independent TV and cable companies, and he created the state television, which they all do, North Korea and Russia and so forth. So, yeah. But in the end, it was force, and it was not the average, Colombian narco story, because this isn't just about narco. This is about the oil, the control of the oil, all of the state actors, all the friendships, all the ideological things that they needed to be successful.
I think that's the thing that surprises me probably the most about Venezuela in particular. I get that, every other country that we have, issues with, there's obviously a lot of intangibles and dynamics that, separate them and make them their own case. But in Venezuela in particular, it seems strange or even baffling to me that, even if the ideology is what it is, and they hate America and they want communism, blah, 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 you're still sitting on, a veritable gold mine by comparison to the narco trade. Mm-hmm. I don't understand hey, let's let the oil industry and infrastructure degrade to a point where it's a fraction of what it was when we took over, and highlight this much more difficult, much more heavily defended towards and against, especially from the United States. Like, the United States is going to fight through the DEA and all the other agencies that are integrated into counter narcotics work, are gonna battle that a lot harder, and you're gonna have many more hurdles in getting narcotics into the United States than if you just focused on continuing to run the oil. I mean, you're talking tens of trillions of dollars versus tens of billions or maybe hundreds of billions, but the amount of money and capital that was already set up, and it was above board and legit, and gave them far more political clout and power internationally, would have been in oil. Like, why would you turn your back on that and just kind of let it slow down to a dribble by comparison and focus so heavy on narcotics? Like, do you understand why they would do that?
Yeah. So the two biggest factors for this are, and I've thought about this a lot over the many years I've been dealing with this, you have the inept abilities or lack thereof with people in Venezuela. So when they took over the country, you have to remember how their society works, and Latin culture is very different. Latin American culture is very different from ours. Very similar, but different in some senses.
What's the biggest difference?
So when you're in Latin America, and I've lived all over Latin America, and I'm as Viking as they come, right? But, I speak Spanish, and I have family in South America, and I've lived in various different parts, from all the way from Mexico to Central America to South America, right? And some of the Caribbean islands, I've extensive visitation there and so forth. So it wasn't like some agents say, I TDY'd over there. I did a temporary duty in Panama for 3 months. I was living in this. Half of my career was overseas, right? So you get a feel for things. And then when you have family also in different South American locations, you see the unmasked kind of inside of a culture that you would never see if you're living in Dubuque, Iowa. Right? You're just not going to see that. So for me, one of the biggest differences in the professional realm is there's a very heavy kind of accentuation of, I'm an engineer, I'm a doctor, I'm a this, and everything you'll say is, this is engineer so-and-so, this is doctor so-and-so. And we have that with, for example, doctors. Well, I'm Dr. so-and-so, even when you're at a cocktail party or something like that. But how many times have you gone into a room in a cocktail party? I'm Engineer Scott. I'm Engineer Fred.
To me, to be fair, that actually makes more sense than just saying I'm Dr. So-and-so. You know, because it's like, how many years does it take to become a doctor? A lot.
Yeah.
But how many doctors are there? How many, like, hey, I'm DEA Agent West. Hey, I'm Navy SEAL. Mike. It's like, it's a weird emphasis on.
And we would never do that. For me, I wouldn't.
No, me either. But I guess I don't get why we do it for doctors either, though.
I don't know.
It's just one thing. That we, stroke the ego of doctors. Not that it's not impressive. It is. It's just a strange.
No, I understand, and that's the distinction I'm kind of getting at there. Yeah. Whereas we would look at it as kind of like, why are we doing that? Down there, it's expected.
So is that to say that there's an implied much higher sense of professional pride in all industries there?
I think when you have a declined state or an economic depravity, wherever that might be, and a lot of these Latin American countries are very poor, that if they're educated and they have a title, it means much more to them personally in a reflective kind of environment with people, right? Whereas in the United States, you might have a guy that's a plumber and he's making $350,000 a year with his little company, and the guy's killing it. He's killing it, $354,000, $500,000 a year, or an electrician that makes $650,000 a year, right? But he's not going to walk into a room and say, I'm an electrician, right? So, but in Latin America, in some of these poorer countries, to include Venezuela, because it had eroded from, like I said, in the 50s, third largest, economy in the world. Not just, it was the envy of the world, right? To where it's like, I think it's like second to like Haiti now or something, right? So I think that cultural kind of shift in these poor countries accentuates that for them. And that's a big distinction.
And so with that, if I'm, I guess, trying to answer my own question, just from what little bit you've already shared, that makes me assume or maybe ascertain that the pride and ego, in that society was the biggest reason, is that the infrastructure was so heavily relied upon American oil companies that they said, fuck you guys, you're out, and they just didn't have the capability to do it themselves and keep it at that high level because they were too proud to let Americans have any part in it?
No. So to get to the actual answer, I got off base there for you. So when you have the takeover of the regime, and then you had all these engineers in place, well, all the friends and family and the people they owed needed jobs. So you might have to have a petro engineer that's whatever, structural engineer or electronic engineer, whatever, running the PDVSA, the state company. But Jimmy, my cousin, needs a job, and Jimmy didn't even graduate from high school. But now we're going to call Jimmy the sub-vice minister of engineering and innovation. And he's going to take the engineer Frankie's job, and he's out, and we put him in there. And they did that with everything. So now you have all these people that are not trained, but they have great titles. And when you meet them, what are they saying? I'm the vice chair whatever of whatever. And yeah, all of our shit's broken and we're not fixing it and we're losing production but I'm the vice chair.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? And that was rampant throughout every level of the government.
So I guess in that same token then, but because there were also a lot of American oil companies and their infrastructure prior to that they booted out. Is that part of it? Is they just said, everybody out, we're putting our family in and everybody else can kiss our ass?
So in Venezuela, the mindset of the government underneath the Chavistas and extended into Maduro regime and everything was everyone's a spy. Okay. Everyone's a spy. Everyone's trying to undermine us. Everyone's this. And all these oil companies, they just want to take our oil and screw us. Okay. The only company that really lasted was Chevron. Okay. And I don't want to speculate why they got to stay there or what. They're the only ones. They did endure where they were taking the executives and locking them up. And they've all been freed now. I actually lived in a compound. I had to move because they were going to kill me or kidnap me, and they wanted me close to the embassy. I did not want to leave country. That's why I kept staying there, even though we had these little bumps in the road, and I would talk to him, and the money that they were making in Venezuela was just enormous. But they had to deal with crisis after crisis after crisis with an inept government, which was allowing them to be there for whatever reason. They were allowing friendships or whatever favors. I don't know what was happening. And so that was the only company left standing. They started giving companies in Spain and Russia access, right? Because they didn't have to worry about the spies and the takeover and everything else that went along with that.
Yeah. It's surprising that, or maybe it speaks volumes to the eliteness, I guess, of American oil companies then, if they were even bringing in Spanish or Russian or, Chinese, Iranian, what have you, oil companies, and they still didn't have the ability to take advantage of their oil infrastructure to the degree with which it was taken advantage of when we were there.
Not even close, because you have to remember, you could have a core team of individuals that are project managers, that are certain technical specialists, but you still need the workers, skilled, roughnecks and all these other individuals to come in and do it. And, if you watch the show like Landman, which is, on TV right now, you see the roughnecks and what they do. And, they're like, oh, these guys aren't educated. They may not have, college degrees and all this stuff, but the work they do is
sure as hell know what they're
very
doing
specialist.
Yeah.
They're specialists, man. And you don't have that in Venezuela. You got to find workers that are willing to do the job, number one, because it's very, very dangerous. And number two, that are going to have the ability to adapt and be skilled in doing that job and receptive to training. And they just failed miserably at that.
Yeah. So we've kind of gotten the backstory on everything that led up to this. The last question I want to ask, kind of in the rear view before we get into kind of what's happening currently and moving forward, is there a closest call that you encountered while you were there that sticks out in your mind?
A lot, man. One of the biggest was I got a call to meet a very high-level governmental member, and that was close to the presidency. And the call came in at like 9 o'clock at night. and it was from another associate of this person. It said, hey, you need to come down here now and have dinner. And I'm like, 9 o'clock at night. And I was like, I already ate. Yeah, but you need to come and have a dinner. So, well, I'll be waiting for you. I was like, sure, okay. I'm like, man, what is going on, right? So you have to remember that this is a story about some of the inept or, you know, kind of conflicting things that happen with other agents that want to get in the mix. And so I got in my car and I'm driving and I made a few phone calls to different people, some sources I had and things like that. They're like, don't go to that dinner. Dude, something's not right. Something's weird. But they weren't able to dig into it. So I just had this weird feeling and people telling me like something's not right. As I'm driving, I pulled over and I made a phone call to the U.S. And I talked to someone in a certain division. And I said, I just got a phone call from this one person I'm meeting, and the phone was freaking silent on the other end. Like the kind of silence that's like, oh, shoot, this is not good, right? And when I heard that dead silence, I'm like, what the hell's going on? And that person was like, well, yeah, we kind of like had someone that was supposed to meet him, but that person disappeared. We don't know where the person is. And I'm like, you're kidding me, right? Really? You know what I'm doing. I don't know everything you're doing. I have to rely on you to follow protocol and operating procedure and the law. If you're going to send someone, you have to send me a cable that clearly gets permission. I have to ask the chief of mission, the ambassador, if we're going to be bringing people in the country and all these things. There's rules that we go by, and there's a reason for those rules so that you don't get someone killed or compromised or what have you, right? So I'm sitting on the side of the road, and this person is extremely important for me to meet with, okay? And I'm like, how many hours has this been? And he's like, oh, it's been like 10 hours. I said, you didn't think about maybe let me know? And I made a phone call to that person's boss. And this person like, well, I told you months ago we were going to bring someone down. And it was all BS because this guy knew what he was supposed to do. He didn't do. I went to the meeting anyway. I probably shouldn't, but I did. And it ended up actually working out. But there was overture in that meeting like, hey, you mother, you know, I kind of know what was going on. And come to find out, the person did end up surviving and everything was okay. But it wasn't okay with me because this is just an example of where you have someone that is so eager to make their case and put their name in the lights and do all these things that they'll actually risk another agent or an American on the ground. I would never do that. You know, I'm not personally going to do that.
What precautions are you able to take living there on the ground? Because I assume you're not living at the embassy, or are you?
No, I started out living like 4 or 5 miles away, and then they moved me 2 or 3 times, and finally I was right up near the embassy almost.
So, I mean, from a kind of boots on the ground aspect, like what countermeasures, and maybe it's important not to disclose them on here, I don't know, but I'm just curious, like, how do you keep yourself safe? Do you have a cover story, a different name, different IDs, passports? Like what?
No, they knew everything about me.
So you're using your real name, your real driver's license, real passport.
Yeah.
You even are openly saying, I'm with the DEA and I'm here to...
Initially, when I went into country, I didn't put my paperwork in to be fully certified because I was afraid.
What does that mean? So
when you get into a country on a visa, you have to get accredited. So you take your visa, you take your paperwork, you fill out some forms, you give it to consular section or whoever, the people in charge at the embassy that do all those things, and they interface with the country you're in, and they certify you as a diplomat, right? So in Venezuela, you actually have full diplomat. You have full diplomatic immunity, whereas in Mexico, DEA agents don't have that. They're just kind of like, if they get jammed up, they could go to prison.
So it's going to vary from country to country.
Country to country.
How you're presenting yourself.
Venezuela gave us diplomatic immunity.
Okay.
But it doesn't really mean anything, because if they want you dead, they're just going to kill you, smoke you in a parking lot, dump your body, make it look like a robbery, and then the cops come, they write the reports as they're told, everything, the photos, everything are going to be shown. They could put a needle in your arm, shoot dope into you, say he's a drug fiend, he got robbed. I mean, they could do whatever they want. They control the ground.
So what is the motivation or maybe the thought process behind the DEA leadership in going about it in that way, where they are certifying you above board as a diplomat if that means nothing, and that is a very possible outcome? Like, why not then have cover stories, fake IDs, and do more of an espionage spy route kind of method?
Right. So DEA is not a spy agency.
But still, I mean, to me, it's like best case or best practices. Wouldn't it make more sense to go that route if diplomat means nothing?
Well, there are instances where we could do those things. I'm not going to discuss those things, but not so much in diplomatic mission type of effort. Okay. It's more of when you're a country attaché like I was a country attaché in Venezuela, so I was the boss. Everything that happened in the country had to come through me. So I was a point of contact for official duties and official engagements, official ceremonies, official everything, right? But because it was such a small office, me, and then we had some other guys come at the end of my tour, and they ended up continuing after I left. I had to go to these official functions, but I had to do my other functions, which were much more important than going to wine and cheese, dinner or whatever it was. I could care less about that, right? But I had to do it anyway because that was part of my mission requirements.
Yeah.
But it was a hostile environment too, so we didn't have as many of those as you would in different countries that I've been in, where we're constantly going to all these dinners, engagements, and awards.
I do find it surprising that during the Chavez regime, that him and his government even allowed diplomatic certification from the United States. Do you know why they even allowed it to begin with?
So at the time that I was there, and even afterwards, we couldn't get visas for people, okay? So we had to do like a vice. So we would tell the Venezuelans, like, you're not getting an American visa for your diplomat. And remember, they have consulate at the time, Miami, Houston, Chicago, and then New York, and then, of course, they had the embassy in D.C., right? So they had a big mission footprint in our country, and we had one place, Caracas, right? So even the embassy was maybe 350 people. It was a medium-sized embassy. You can look at it online and see it's a really gorgeous building. My office overlooked La Carlota, the airport that they bombed and all that stuff. It was right there. It's gorgeous. But they wouldn't issue them visas. Remember, the Venezuelans, for the most part, the Chavistas were living good, but they were still stuck in a hellhole. They're still stuck in Caracas. They're still stuck in a place where the bridges are collapsing and the gangs come out in the street and rob people and so forth. When they have an opportunity, like, I can go to Chicago. What's Chicago like? Well, I can go to Houston. What's Houston? Oh my God, I can go to New York City. My kids could go to private school and everything's paid for by the Bolivar Chavista movement. They had a lot more incentive than we did, and our government would hold the pressure to them. Okay. And then they would issue a visa for one of our visas. And finally, it was so important to them that we get a DEA guy in country, because the last DEA guy was leaving there, and he was basically closing the office down. That was his job. I mean, he did other things too, but he was supposed to wind it down from 35 guys to nothing, right? That they said, you are not getting another visa for any diplomat. And hats off to the State Department that did this, because this is going back, into the Obama years when they didn't have a lot of oomph. It just wasn't a lot of backbone on these guys, right? And they said, finally, the ambassador at the time was like, we're not issuing it. And they went 3, 4, 5 months where it was like a Mexican standoff. And finally they gave in, and that's how I got my visa. But the first time that I ever met Tarek El-Assaimi, he was the Minister of Justice, after an HVT operation where we actually got a couple high-level targets, and we're getting him out of the country. And I met with him the first time I met with him like on 3 occasions. This is the first time where he's threatening me. And this is the Minister of Justice. And he said, you go back home to D.C., and he's talking in Spanish. You go back home to D.C., and you tell them this and this and this, and you make sure they understand. And I was like, well, I live right here. And he was like, the look on his face was like, he didn't even know I had a visa. He's a minister of justice. And I had held off on getting my accreditation, but I couldn't resist putting it up this guy's, keister, right? I just couldn't resist it because he was such a dick. And not only that, but, here he is anti-American, but he's driving Tahoes. He's got an Apple phone and, he has everything American, but he's given us the middle finger, right? So and then finally someone came to me in the embassy from the front office, the ambassador's office, and they're like, you're not accredited. What the hell are you doing? If you get jammed up, they could say you're not an accredited diplomat. And I was like, I didn't want to give it to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs because I didn't want a red flag to go up. And they're like, screw this guy, we're not giving him a visa. That was my concern. So I operated for like 5 months without an accreditation, maybe 4 months without accreditation.
Wow.
Yeah.
Were you aware of any kind of backroom or unofficial stance or position on behalf of the entire Venezuelan government, that almost kind of like the way the mob would say, hey, this guy's a made guy, you leave him alone, essentially saying, hey, the visa program is so important to us, we don't like it, but we've got to let you in the country and don't fuck with them too much. Like, do you know if there was any of that kind of...
It existed. Everywhere you go overseas, that level exists. Here it was at the level of like, not just messing, like, we can kill this guy or not kill him. Well, maybe we could kill him, but we have to do this. Well, maybe we can't. That's the level. This is like the push that they were at, like at points, because we were hitting them hard. We were hurting them hard, and they didn't like what we were doing. That's why ultimately they refused to give my renewal, because I would have stayed there even longer. It's probably better I didn't stay there because they might have killed me, right? And then after I left, they put a contract on to kill me anyway. Yeah. So, but that's a huge badge of honor. I'm so proud of that. Like, I have a warrant for me to this day for espionage in Venezuela.
Wow.
Right? So, it's not like they loved me. Well, they shouldn't love me. I'm a DEA agent. Yeah. I'm running an office down there going after all the bad guys,
You know you're doing something right if
That's
there's
right.
a bounty on your head.
That's right.
Last kind of in the rear view question, then we'll move on to the current stuff. Did you have a favorite Venezuelan dish that you like to eat while you were there?
The arepa is like everyone, you see the memes and all the stuff about the arepa. Like sometimes no one had money there. Like the Americans, like what we made was, we were considered so wealthy, I remember, and not to get too much off topic, but just kind of set the atmospherics of, when I first moved there, I lived in a specific building, and this is where the Chevron head of Latin American Legal Counsel lived. I had no business living there. I had a bar that was like 15 feet wide. It was like 4 feet deep with like 30 shelves. And I had floor-to-ceiling windows. And you could open them all up, and you're on a hill overlooking the whole city. And this place, I think they were paying $15,000 a month.
Wow.
But the reason why I lived there was it was a fortress. And they were one of the few compounds that allowed armed guards. And I've seen the armed guards like pull their guns and get a smoke like the robbers trying to come in. This is how dangerous Caracas is. It was bad. I had to move from there because some policemen were going to kidnap me and kill me or try to extort money and things like that, because the road was kind of isolated. So I had to get off and go closer, and I took a real downgrade. It was horrible. Yeah. I took the RSO's house at that point. It was nice, but it was not where I was living before. It was super. It was very nice. Yeah.
But the arepa, is that what you call it?
The arepa. Right. So my whole thing was there was a little shop that I could stop on my way to go to that place, and when we walked in, you'd get two reactions. To get an arepa. And this place would always accept me because they knew me, because I would stop there and get the arepas. But if I went to another shop that wasn't close to my house, sometimes I remember walking in, they're like, Janky, fuera! Like, get out, gringo. You know, they wouldn't even let me in their restaurant. But it is like a corn. It's like, picture like a corn tortilla, but really thick. And it's cut into like a pocket, like a pita. But it's nothing like pita bread. It's like a sweet. And they put different kinds of meats and cheese and stuff like that in it. And the first time I had it, I was like, oh my God, this is so good. I didn't think it was going to be so good, but it's unbelievably good. Like, it's not like anything we have in the United States. If you could find a Venezuelan restaurant, go have an arepa there. It doesn't even matter, just vegetables and cheese or cheese and beef, whatever, and try it. And you're going to be like, holy cow, this is world famous.
Do they have authentic Venezuelan restaurants in Miami?
They do, yeah.
I mean,
they have a lot of. No? Oh yeah. Like a month ago, I had an arepa.
That's awesome. All right, guys, winter's here, and I've been spending a lot more time indoors, which means more hours on my HELIX mattress, which has really changed the way I sleep. HELIX sent me my mattress for free, in my honest opinion, and I didn't realize how bad my old mattress was until I switched. I used to wake up stiff, tossing and turning and sweating through the night. Since I moved to HELIX, I sleep deeper, I don't wake up with a sore back, and I stay comfortable all night. If you've never bought a mattress online, HELIX makes it easy. You take their sleep quiz and it matches you with the right mattress based on how you sleep. Firm, soft, side sleeper, stomach sleeper, whatever. Ships right to your door, free, and you get 120 nights to try it out, plus a lifetime warranty. HELIX is also the most awarded mattress brand, tested and reviewed by outlets like Forbes and Wired. And they ran a study showing 82% of people saw an increase in deep sleep on a HELIX. I'm in that group, and I feel it every morning. So here's the deal. Go to helixsleep.com/micdrop for 27% off site-wide. That's helixsleep.com/micdrop for 27% off site-wide. Make sure that you enter the show name after checkout so they know that I sent you. All right, so I want to kind of transition into the current climate and talk about, you know, with the level of expertise and history that you have there, and kind of understanding both the magnitude of what's taken place as well as the challenges moving forward. You know, it's in this very fragile state right now where, you know, the current political and day-to-day structure of leadership, if you even want to call it that, authority, I guess we would say, has been removed. And so you've got, you know, essentially a bit of a power vacuum. It seems like there's kind of three major centers, one in particular that seems to be the most likely that's going to, you know, take the helm. You know, but is there an objectively better person to take it over that's a Venezuelan national? Is the entire country corrupt? Like, what are your thoughts on that, and what you think, A, is the most likely path forward, and B, what you think the best path forward would be?
So what we're seeing is something that I don't think any of us have ever seen, the playbook coming out of the presidency that we have here. So we have Trump, Secretary of State Rubio, and then we're employing all these people into country right now as we speak. You can go on social media and see the convoys going to the U.S. Embassy. It's been vacant for the last 10 years. We are having discussions with the now president of Venezuela, and I don't say Trump because there were some memes saying that, you know, Trump is the interim president of Venezuela and things like that. Delcy Rodriguez is actually, on paper, per constitution, swore in president of Venezuela. Now, she was the vice president under Nicolás Maduro. And I remember when this first broke and I was on the news channels, you know, doing appearances, and I call her Miss Feckless because she is probably the worst person we could ever have. And not only is she complicit in criminal activity, I'm sure she'll be indicted at some point, but she is just that, feckless. She's just a horrible lack of leader. If you could embody like the worst kind of person to be a vice president, besides maybe Dan Quayle or Joe Biden, it would be her.
I was just going to say, maybe Biden under Obama. He was actually a lot more of a powerhouse when he was a vice president. He still had some mental constitution left.
Yeah.
Do you know why they didn't snatch her up too? Like, why did they leave her in place?
You know what? I'm just guessing. I didn't focus on her when I had my time. She was a nothing Berger when I was around. My guess is they were spinning up the indictment and trying to play catch up with it. We had a superseding indictment just before they went in. I mean, and this just goes to the level of the fact that, you know, and this isn't really Trump's fault because he's only been in office for another year for 47's duration, right? So 45 he was there, but the first 4 years he was fighting a myriad of issues and trying to get, you know, a handle of what's going on. So when he takes presidency this time, you know, obviously there's a lot going on around the world, and then this develops, and then they go after him, and then DOJ tries to spin up because the niche work in Venezuela is very small. There's only a few people really in DEA or FBI, and I won't speculate on the intelligence services, but that really know what they're talking about when it comes to Venezuela. I have seen, and you've probably seen this in your time in the USG, everyone that worked for Uncle Sugar is now an expert. I've seen resumes.
I'm an expert.
Changed. You actually are an expert on, you know, obviously, you know,
There's
with team
very
stuff.
few things I would even say I have some level of competency on, but go ahead.
So I've seen guys change their resumes to all of a sudden, you know, they were in New Delhi. I'm just throwing these names out. I was in New Delhi, India for 8 years, but I'm a maritime New Delhi expert.
Yeah.
And you just got to kind of laugh at it. And I'm like, guys, you know, don't invent something you don't own. You know, your time will come, you know. Yeah. But the danger of that is the misinformation that comes out when you're on social media and you're trying to say I'm an expert and I'm a this and I'm a that. It gets, you know, you got to put the waders on because, you know, it's just horrible information. So people aren't getting the right information.
Yeah. In digging in and just, you know, research-wise for this show, I came across Cabello, Vladimir Lopez, Delcy Rodriguez as being the three kind of old guard, you know, possible passing of the torch to one of those three. They seem, from everything that I've read, all three basically equally not a good choice. Maria Machado being the most important opposition figure that it seems like would, at least from what I gathered, seems like she would be the best foot forward for the world and the country in terms of cooperation. The three old guard folks as well as Machado, do you have kind of a frame of reference or any coloring that you can put on to what you think that the likely outcome of those four people in a power struggle and what our involvement may or may not be?
Right. So there's a plan in place with Trump right now, I think, to keep the homeostasis going in country until we get a firm grip and we start, you know, making the deals with the other countries and all the expectations that are coming with that. But here's what I say to put it in terms so that your listeners can say, oh, that kind of makes sense. You have Rodriguez, the vice president. She holds the pen of power in Venezuela officially. You have Diosdado. Diosdado holds the keys to the police departments, the intelligence, things on the streets. Okay, Rodriguez holds the military keys. Okay, everything military. Corina Machado, she holds the people's hearts. She is the one that was the opposition leader. I met her in 2011. She's a wonderful person. She's articulate, but more importantly, she really cares about the country, her country. This is her country she saw go to hell. She confronted Hugo Chavez back in the day at risk when Hugo Chavez was just throwing people in prison and torturing and killing them, okay? And she's fought for years and years and years. She couldn't make it happen because the machine was too strong. But she's the one, I believe, wholeheartedly, the standout. You know, they threw a guy up, his name was Guaido. They threw him up a few years ago to be, you know, the opposition guy, the guy Trump wanted to put in, and it just never came to any. He never pulled the roots and really went in. He just didn't have that leadership quality. Machado has it. And when you watch her and Google her, you'll see her. And when she speaks, because it's all about passion, she cares about the country. This isn't about being in power. This isn't about what. This is restoration of the Constitution, bringing the people back to Venezuela to have a prosperous nation once again. And that's what I hope happens. A lot of it is going to be, is Uncle Sugar going to back her? That's going to be the key.
Well, I think that, so that sounds great and ideal and kind of in theory, hopefully what happens.
Yeah.
Obviously, you have a still mantled or non-dismantled enormous narco network. Mm-hmm. Yes, we've put maybe some kind of dent in it over the last year or whatever, but probably not a huge one. There's still a narco element, a narco-terrorist, a terrorist element. You have one guy in charge or basically can dictate to the military and they're going to listen and follow him. Mm-hmm. You have one guy who, has the reins on the power of the government from an intel and resource standpoint. And then you have this hood ornament of a former vice president who's now in charge. To me, that presents a host of incredibly challenging things. Even if the entire country from a free and fair election puts Machado in place, you still have to take the reins from those other two guys and boot, the former vice president. Yeah. So, from your experience in understanding the culture, the way that the government is set up, I think we can all agree that's a heavy lift and going to be a challenge. What do you think the current administration needs to do to effectively navigate that and make it happen with the least amount of collateral damage and kind of blackening of the U.S. eyes to the Venezuelan people?
I think, they have been brainwashed for so many years, most of the Chavistas there. Even though they have no food, they're eating beans and rice for the last decade. They still will die to the last breath for Chavismo, right? So you have those diehards, but they're really not the power-playing people. It's the masses. You see the videos of the people, like the old guys. Oh, comandante! You have some 80-year-old guy can barely walk, or some guy with a stick doing kung fu, and you're like going, this is what these regimes do, right? If I were, and this is a simplistic view of it, I think Trump has done some of this already. He's told the Estado. He's told, Rodriguez. And I think he's told everyone at the highest levels, trickle it down. This is what's going to happen. If you screw with us, either you're going to be dead or we're going to put you in prison just like Maduro. You make your choice, and there's no second askings, right? You do it, or this is what's going to happen, because that's all they understand. The Estado, after they grabbed Chavez, he was making these speeches. He had the colectivos on his side. He was giving them weapons, the colectivos in the streets. It's like handing Antifa an AK-47, and 9mm saying, go out and do what you do. And they did. They were going out and robbing and doing various things, right? So this guy, I think now when you've seen him in the videos, he's very tame. I think they told him, and this is what I would do too. Listen, you're going to either come out of here in a box or you're going to come out of here in handcuffs. I really don't care which one it is, but it's going to happen. So you fall in line, you make transition the way it needs to be. If you don't like it, we'll take care of it, but I suggest you do. And it looks like they're actually like falling in line, because until you play hardball with these people, and people are like, I see on social media, like, oh, you're dictating to a country and it's a democracy. No, it's not. These people are savages. They torture, kidnap, destroyed a country, created instability in our region, in our hemisphere that we have to deal with, right? And we have missiles pointing at our country before this went down. So this is much greater than the oil and changing of regimes and all this other stuff. So I think that's what I would do. But you have to put key people, and that's where, right now as we speak, Machado is meeting President Trump today, right? And I'm sure she's like, Mr. President, please. Remember, she offered to give her Nobel Peace Prize to him. She offered it. The committee said, no, you can't do that. It wouldn't surprise me if she did it anyway. But she is finally, and not only she, but all my Venezuelan friends in South Florida and around the country, they are praising what Trump did because it gives them that opportunity to get their country back. And that's what she's probably saying. Listen, give me an opportunity to help in the transition. If I were doing this, I would have not just insiders like some of the insiders that I know that are actually participating in Washington, D.C. And the problem with some of these insiders is it's a cyclical kind of like political cycle, okay? And what happens is you have the politics of what's going on just going around in circles, Well, someone like Machado understands the whole chessboard, the history, the current status, where the projection should be for the future. And you got to work with people like that to put all the places on the chessboard in country and plan for the future, because you just can't look at right now. It's got to be 5 years from now, and you have to have someone that has that vision to do it. And I think she can do that for him.
Yeah, from everything that I've read and gathered, obviously I don't have the experience you do, but it seems like, you know, she's by far the best candidate. Sounds like the pressure that the Trump admin is putting on the rest of the government is at least starting to work. A couple of wild cards that I'm curious if you foresee them popping up later or subsequently as being a problem is you got the Colombian ELN guerrilla network, you know, messing with gold mines and doing more kind of mobster narco kind of stuff. But then you also have, you know, Iran has quite an extensive military footprint and, you know, the drones, weapons facilities, logistics, all kinds of things there. Similarly, like, again, having not been there, but I can imagine, I can't imagine that they're going to put up too much of a fight, you know, but you never know. I mean, those are still two wild cards that who knows how they're going to play out. Do you see either one of those elements becoming a big thorn in our side or Venezuela's side down the road?
Right now, I don't see that happening. We still have the potential for things like that to occur, you know, but this is not the Middle East. You know, we don't have to worry about Shia alliances, Hezbollah alliances in Iran and Hamas and all these things in a stronghold environment that they have, because they don't have that here. You know, we have these forward deployed proxy networks into Venezuela, but they don't own the land. It's not like the Cubans. The Cubans, you know, they're part of the fabric of Venezuela. That's going to be the hardest one to root out. But the Cubans are not there to blow shit up. They're not there to overtake the country. They were there as an insulator and a protector for both the Cuban interests and the Venezuelan interests, right? So it's a different mechanism. Yeah. And right now, everyone, when I say everyone, I mean everyone from the Chinese. Remember, the Chinese were just met with Maduro 24 hours beforehand. We went and snatched him up and brought him to New York. So the whole world's looking at this going, oh boy. So all these like ELN and FARC, if they want a quick death, if they want to create an issue with the United States of America, now is not the time for them to do it. They better be a little more strategic.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly encouraging. The last thing that sounds like is going to need to be navigated and could potentially cause problems is, you know, the fallen regime has tens of billions of dollars of debt to the Chinese, to the Iranians, to the Russians, to even some European countries in oil debt, et cetera. You know, we basically kicked the hornet's nest over and flipped them off and basically just said, yeah, tough shit, you're not getting your money. You know, I can't imagine most of those countries being able to, or even if they could, deciding to do something about it, with the exception of maybe China or Russia. Do you foresee that becoming a problem where they say, hey, you guys, you know, you took over their government, you took over their debts, pay up, and we just tell them to pound sand? Or what?
We'll tell them to kick rocks right now, and they're not going to do anything about it. Yeah. They are accepting Germany, for example. Let's go to the EU. Germany is accepting oil and gas from Russia. I mean, that, you know, you're going to accept all of these natural resources from a country that maybe could invade you in 3 or 4 or 5 years, right? Mm-hmm. It just doesn't make sense. Yeah. You don't see Poland doing that, right? So, you know, you have some nonsensical leader in some of these European countries that have been so dependent on American stances, firepower, and they prioritized things. They've lost touch. And many of them, until Trump came in, they didn't even pay the funding they were supposed to pay, 3%, 4%, whatever UN, for example, in their budgetary alignment, right? So, and now they're paying it for the most part. So They don't have the forward deployed abilities to go outside of Europe, many of them. The Brits do, obviously, but no one really seriously considers the Brits as potentially launching an offensive against the United States of America or Canada, or, just not going to happen. Diplomatically, yes, everyone's in a bind, but right now, the feathers are all up, everyone's pissed, but the real consternation is not really even Venezuela, and we could care less what China thinks. China's hitting us with cyber attacks, espionage. They're doing a whole variety of things. So
Verizon going down.
Yeah, we could care less, right? Did you see the meme with Trump on the cell tower fixing it?
No.
Yeah. So, but yeah. So for the most part, when I look at the potential threats and all that, Greenland is creating the most consternation in Europe right now because we're telling them we're going to take Greenland. So they're all concerned. I think the Dutch are even sending some troops over there. I mean, what are the Dutch going to do? I mean,
Dutch or Danish?
Danish. I'm sorry, the Danish, right? But the Canadians are sending some troops up too. Obviously, geographically, there. So you have, the Danes. Their army is. I don't even know how many people are in their army. What, they have 300,000 people in the Danish army or something.
Yeah, obviously, probably do a separate episode on Greenland alone. I understand its political and geographical importance. What I honestly can't fathom is the kind of emboldened annexation of it. To me, how would you, if you're looking at it as objectively as possible, and if I'm way out of my lane and I just don't understand the big picture, which I'm sure plenty of people in the comments will remind me of, I don't see a huge difference in saying, hey, Greenland is important, we're going to annex it, any or much different than Russia annexing Crimea. Mm-hmm. I would ask anyone, help me understand the distinction if there is one, because I want to understand better, because I don't see a huge difference.
Yeah.
Now, how it's done, maybe is the big difference, in that I don't know how you annex or take over a landmass that size that belongs to another country without force.
Yeah. That's frozen.
Well, yeah, but I don't understand I understand the desire to have it. I don't understand the desire to take it.
I don't know why we're fighting that fight. I don't know if there's something that we don't know behind the scenes of some grave nature that we need to take it, or if it's just something that's just kind of tickling the backside of the president, or I don't know. Yeah. I don't know, and I don't know if we're gonna know. But
yeah, who knows? Maybe it's a distraction. Maybe there's no intention, and it's just look over here while I do this other thing. Who knows? You never know. But,
and look what's going on in Iran, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you're onto something with that.
Yeah. Who knows? Getting back to the Venezuela stuff, before we sat down to record, you mentioned, and I know this in particular, especially given the nature of the units and et cetera, you got to be really careful. But you worked with some sources in preparation for the operation. I know you can't say much, but if you could just kind of give whatever you can to
Sure.
that.
So myself and a very small number, like under 5, worked on intel that was utilized for the op, for what occurred. I won't get into any of the other details, but the veracity of the information is really good. It's almost irrefutable. No one intel packet is going to give you everything you need. We're not the USG. We don't claim to have had every key to the city, but we know for a fact, and I'm extremely confident that the intel we provided helped fill a lot of great gaps and things. I'm proud that we did it. I'm not going to discuss it who it went to, but it went to the direct people that need it, at the highest levels of people that were doing the operation. So one little small part, even though I'm retired, there is still a reward for justice, $50 million for Maduro that people can put in for if they were involved in that operation. I certainly would do that myself. But on the other side of the coin too, I have a lot of Venezuelan friends. I worked in that country for years, and I maintained friendships, expanded friendships, and so forth. And for me, it's really about liberating a people and allowing a country to be whole again. And yet, the secondary effects are that we get to have a more stable Western Hemisphere. So,
sure.
Win-win.
Yeah. All right, guys, let me be straight with you. Sometime around my mid-30s, I would say that things started to slip, same workouts, but worse results. I'd crash most afternoons, and the mirror wasn't telling me anything that I wanted to see. I went down the rabbit hole, and everything pointed towards kind of the standard low testosterone symptoms. I did look at TRT, but realizing that it comes with needles every week, shutting down natural production, as well as the thousands of dollars per year, and frankly, the roller coaster of spikes and peaks and valleys, I just didn't want to deal with it. It's a hard pass. Mars Men sent me their stack for free, and my honest opinion is this is the route I'm going to take. I like to support my body naturally. I don't like replacing anything artificially unless I absolutely have to. It is a natural testosterone support system. It's got ingredients like Tongkat Ali, Shilajit, zinc, boron, and it's designed to help your body make use of what it already produces. There's no synthetics, no needles, and for me, the biggest change has been a steady increase in energy all day long with faster recovery. So, for a limited time, our listeners get 50% off for life plus free shipping and 3 free gifts at mengotomars.com. It's a perfect way to kick off the new year strong. That's mengotomars.com for 50% off and 3 free gifts when you check out. After you purchase, they'll ask where you heard about them. If you could please support our show and tell them that Mike Drop sent you. These statements and products have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or condition. That's amazing. Can I ask, or can you share, was that something that your collective small group got together and said, let's do this for X, or did X ask you to augment?
No, we got together, made an offering with some evidentiary examples, and I think when they saw what we had to offer, it was come back for more.
Yeah.
We want this.
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. I imagine the other groups of the team were similar to your background and experience, or was it a host of different? It
was different, but the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
What
would the U.S. public consistently underestimate about operating in Venezuela?
There's good and bad when you look at, what's the biggest obstacle? The biggest obstacle is every inch of that ground is corrupted. It's kind of like Mexico. Okay, it's a South American version of Mexico. Every level of that government has been permeated by some corrupt facet. So no matter where you go, even if you find, for example, if you work in human sources and you work human sources, I would vet these human sources so much, so carefully, so consistently, so often for years. I wouldn't do one polygraph. Sometimes I'd do 2, 3, 4 surprise polygraphs. I would do everything I could, because when you're operating there, like I was, and like some of the other people that were with me after I left and took over and things like that, these people will kill you. I mean, they put a contract on me after I left. They were so pissed because of a very, very large $500 or so million seizure that occurred, and they blame me.
Yeah.
So, and that's the biggest problem for every USG worker that goes there. All these people that are going there, when you go to a country like this, it's kind of like a denied area country, kind of like a North Korea, kind of like a Russia, kind of like, a Cuba. And look what happened to our guys and gals in Cuba. They hit them with these radar kind of wave, devices and created brain damage.
Or the Havana effect or whatever.
Havana effect, right? So, and we know it's a real thing now. And that's what you're dealing with down there. When I had that dinner with that one very important individual within the highest level of the government, all I could do while I was eating my meal was thinking they put something in here that's going to create something in me 5 years from now.
Yeah.
That's all I could think about when I was eating this dinner. And it was freaking delicious, by the way.
Looking at it kind of, I would say purely from an analyst standpoint, what is or is there a domino effect that you, I guess, are concerned with in removing Maduro in the manner that we did?
I have zero concerns in the removal. And I think what we're seeing is a week after the fall of the Venezuelan leader Maduro, we have the uprising in Iran, right? And we know the Iranian issue has just been, a thorn in our side for 40 years, right? And now we're seeing the potential erasure of what they have on the ground now, what the government is, who is leading it, what's going to happen with the Ayatollah, what's going to happen with all that leadership. Are they going to have to flee for their lives? Are we going to have a restoration of that government back to the people? And so this is not an isolated kind of like one-off. This is a result of a pattern of, I think, a pattern of behavior of the President of the United States, Donald Trump, to say, hate him, like him, whatever, disagree or I don't agree with everything he does by any means. Greenland, like, really? I have no clue what that's about. But with Venezuela, I don't have that consternation because I think this is going to be the impotence of, boom, we have the Iran. Boom, we have Cuba, right? We have problems in Cuba. Boom, we have Colombia now. He's bringing the rhetoric down, right? Petro in Colombia. And Colombia's, been a staunch defender of the United States and democracy and everything for many, many years. I don't think that guy's going to last. But we have to posture up in our own hemisphere and around the world and say, we're not going to let you screw around here. And Marco Rubio has said this over and over and over, very eloquently, by the way. The guy's really impressed the hell out of me. I mean, he's really taken charge. The memes of him dressed in all the different things that he's doing, but he's doing a great job. And I think part of that is the passion of the Western Hemisphere. He comes from Cuban heritage, and he knows these issues. He was a senator, South Florida. He knows the Venezuelan community, the Cuban community. He knows what the power of these people and what they want. They want to return and what we have to do. So I don't have problems or concerns. The only issue I have is the implementation of, reinstating a prosperous democratic government within Venezuela, one that we can depend on and foster, and it's going to be decades in the making. Yeah. And I hope, like your question earlier, that they're doing the right thing, because sometimes, with the agency, we've all read the stories with CIA, they go in and they just create a total mess. Yeah. And I'm not dogging them by any means, because when you're handed broken eggs, are you going to scrape them together, make an omelet out of it? Well, that's kind of what they have to do sometimes. Right. It's not an easy task.
For sure. Do you know if there was any DEA presence in the same or similar capacity to what you did in country recently when this raid happened? Were there any?
The whole diplomatic mission had been removed.
Yeah, okay. So I guess even though it's a little bit apples to oranges, but from the DEA side, is there a hardest part for you guys coordinating with military and government intelligence on a raid like this when the DEA is part of it? Like, what's the biggest challenge?
So with an op like this, so I know there were some FBI HRT guys, hostage rescue guys, close to the op, but not in the op, right? And there's some SRT guys too from DEA, right? Special response team guys. And some of those positions, like HRT, for example, team guys, Delta guys, different SF guys, they might have whatever on the teams, right? Then they have maybe guys that are on SWAT or whatever. Same thing with DEA. We have a lot of team guys become, when they leave Navy, they become, SRT guys with DEA and so forth. But we are not operators. I mean, we have jobs where we're kind of like that. But if you're not doing that job at the level like a team guy is doing consistently at that level, or a Delta guy consistently, don't even get in the same ballpark with these guys, because you can't keep up. You're not going to keep up. You shouldn't be expected to keep up. So that tactical element is kind of removed, because everyone understands that game. You understand. I mean, you understand. You might have a guy, when I was on SWAT with my local department, I was pretty good. Don't get me wrong, but I wasn't tier 1 good. I mean, that was not my job. I was a police officer, right? So I think, that element was gone. And every agency, from HSI to FBI to DEA to whoever, the big guys, right? We have LNOs that are liaison guys that are in every facet. Boom, 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 boom. And what we'll do in an op like this is we'll send 2 or 3 guys to augment an LNO. Most of these LNOs are 15s or SESs. We have LNOs that are with the agency that are SESs. I was an LNO. Well, I was an embedded guy, very different from LNO, but I was an embedded guy doing operational stuff, but I was a 14. I was a group supervisor or supervisory special agent, right? So we have these guys, but we'll supplement it. So you could have someone in Southcom, for example, and you're going to do an op, you might send 2 or 3 guys down there to interface and have that exchange that's open. And we do that across the board with USG.
Yeah. So, I mean, from an operational standpoint, I certainly understand the more limited role that HRT or that type of, operator augmentation to the military and intelligence. But would the DEA play a role, and specifically in this, from a coordination or intelligence gathering in terms of submitting or augmenting operational units for their mission on the ground? Would the DEA or did the DEA play a role in providing intel for that, do you think?
So the indictments are, in a sense, owned by DEA, right, with the Southern District of New York. So DEA, along with many divisions, whether it's Florida, whether it's Georgia, whether it's SOD, whatever it is, they're going to put all their cases that they have on the table with the prosecutors, and they're going to say, okay, this is what we currently have, because in 2020 they had the indictment on 15 members of the regime, right? So they laid it all out, they did the indictments, they put it up. At this last push, at the last minute, they did a superseding indictment because I don't think they liked what they had. I don't know why, because really you could supersede the indictment at any level, but they threw in these machine guns and all this other stuff because those cases maybe had better evidence. I'm not sure. Because you have, in the indictment, you'll have littler cases that might be, smaller tonnage or maybe smaller amounts of weapons or whatever. You're not going to use every witness to augment your case. You have to pick cases that are like as solid as they come, so that when you go in front of the court and discovery is due, because when you bring Nicolás Maduro, the judge is going to set dates for the docket and different things, a discovery. So everything the government has, they have to turn over. And they have to turn that over, and then someone's going to look at this, some attorney for Maduro is going to look at it and say, oh, we could beat this. This is like slapstick stuff. Or he's going to look at it and say, you know what, Nicolas? I suggest you cooperate and try to bring down your sentence, like so many of these narcos have done. And previously, they've got some other high-level Venezuelans that did the same thing.
There does seem to be a bit of a blurred line between counter-narcotic and counter-terrorism. And when you label a narco-trafficking organization as a narco-terrorist organization, it seems to further muddy that water, kind of in relation to what you're talking about, where now indictments and charges play a big role in the, if you want to call it a legality of now, obtaining that person, using the military, going outside the international boundary of the United States, capturing him, bringing him back, and then charging him, with a criminal indictment. It is kind of a strange, blurred line. Yeah. Do you see a downside to the emboldening of the toolbox that exists when you label a narco organization as a narco-terrorist organization, and now it's not just law enforcement, you have the full weight of the entire U.S. military and government, intel services, et cetera, there's the obvious upside of way more resources and kind of reach and firepower to combat them. Do you see a downside to it?
The downside for me comes from the internal mechanisms that lack within agencies. When I went to Venezuela, I went to what they call fork and knife school, which teaches you all the diplomatic stuff. But I had already did, I've been in a diplomatic mission before, so I wasn't worried about picking the wrong spoon or using the wrong cup or whatever, right? So, but what happens is you have agents, and we've seen them on the streets of DC that were never police officers. They might have been an accountant or they might have a law degree, and they're out there trying to enforce like a law that is a street level, and then you have ICE agents shooting people in cars and all this other stuff, right? And they're going to be highly scrutinized. They don't have the training for that. Same thing when you're dealing with agents. So when I went to Venezuela, not to get into great detail, but I would do dead drops with phones, calling cards, messages, directions, all those things. I would do that. I would do other things too that I won't really get into too much. But it was very spooky-ish, right? Like spy-ish. But I'm not a spy, right? But I had to do certain things to be safe, and I did them my way. I did it the way that we would do things in DEA, but our training is lacking, so you had to kind of learn how to do it, right? And it was very distinct and different from the CIA, which, I won't even talk about what they do, but I'm talking about my experience as a DEA agent doing this in a foreign country, in a denied country area. How am I going to communicate? How am I going to do dead drops? How am I going to arrange different things in meetings and all these things? I had to do that all on my own because DEA doesn't do that in most places, and they don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
So when you take someone that is trained as just a regular law enforcement officer and then bring them to the federal level, and then you teach them how to be an undercover, well, undercover is great, but what I was doing in Venezuela was not undercover. What I was doing in Venezuela is very different. And we don't have a training mechanism for that. So when you say, well, what is your apprehension when you're looking at, this is my apprehension, because when we send guys into these countries and do these things, if they're not careful or they're a little sloppy, it could get them killed or compromise a lot of things. So that is kind of like the biggest concern I have moving forward, because we do have some of these countries that we're working in, and we don't have the training and the mechanisms in place. And someone needs to say, hey, we need to kind of like round off everything we're doing, because now we're doing these level of cases where we have a counter-narcotics angle, counter-terrorism angle, a counterintelligence angle. And not only are you plotting for operational safety and security, but you have to look at the evidentiary. Some things you don't want to know. We used to do, when I was in different states, just one example, we'd have a case and we don't want to get on the stand because we know the case forward and backward. We would grab some new agent like that didn't know anything, that had 2 weeks on the job. Hey, go up and do this initial hearing. Here's what you need to know for the initial hearing. He goes, I don't know this case. That's what we want. And we put him up, and then they try to grill him. He goes, I don't know. You don't know? How can you not know? And he said, well, sir, I just started 2 weeks ago, and they just told me I had to get up here and read this paper to you.
Wow. Yeah. So it sounds like, the downside is you're blurring those lines and putting people a little over their skis or out of their element, kind of biting off more than they can chew.
Yeah.
Would something as simple as compartmentalizing roles and responsibilities in a very defined manner clean that up, or would it still present a challenge?
We do that already, but you can't do that. For example, like when I was a country attaché, I did everything.
Yeah.
Right. So I was doing administrative. I'm doing all the meetings. I'm doing recruitment. I'm doing, operations on the ground. I'm doing communication. I'm doing speeches. I'm doing, you name it, I was doing it. Right. So, but now that when you have the designations in place and you have a precedence of DOD taking the bull by the horns, this is DOD. Make no mistake, DOD's running everything right now. All right, we're tagging along on the judicial end of it because we're law enforcement. That's what we do. And they're kind of leaning in some fashion on law enforcement and the requirements set forth by warrants. But in reality, they're really leaning on the intelligence and what the threat is they're posing to our country. but it's convenient in a sense, and legally, obviously, it's legitimate that they say, "Oh, we have these indictments, so we can do that."
Yeah.
We don't do that in Yemen.
Right. So, is it accurate to say that the biggest shift for the DEA in particular, when you designate a narco organization or a narco trafficking organization to a narco-terrorist organization, is that it removes a lot of your kind of areas of responsibility to the DOD, and it, in essence, takes some of that off your plate, and in return, now you're ending up doing things that you're not really trained for?
No. So usually what you do is, like I said, we kind of have that task force effect. We'll team up and we partner with, and we kind of like bifurcate, trifurcate different things to make sure that we're not going to cross certain things that we don't want to cross, and that we can effectively prosecute as an end game, and we have mechanisms to do that. But what I'm talking about is on the ground, when you're actually doing operations and things, and you don't have the multifaceted team in place, or they can't be in place, and I'm talking denied areas where we don't have the penetration, right? That's when you have to really have someone that knows what they're doing, and they're not going to risk people's lives, and they're not going to risk operational, strategic, forward motion and things like that. So that's more of my concern. I think as we've done this in the past many, many times, but not as the blanket kind of operational sense that we're talking now. So we know how to do it. We just have to get better at it.
Does the same problem exist kind of in reverse in terms of the biggest risk when you're using a counterterrorism force or entity against a criminal organization? Is that you have guys kind of on the other side of the token that are trained for something very specific, that are now doing things that are not kind of by the book from a criminal process standpoint?
Yeah, I wouldn't characterize it as like not by the book. I would characterize it as this is the way they handle business. This is the way we do business. And because now we're doing this both in like the same channel but different lanes, that it has to be done when you're talking about judicial process and so forth. You can't just treat it like a CT thing where what's acceptable number of deaths? 70. For this op, we can do up to 70 deaths, peripheral damage, right? But we're going to take out the bad guys. Oh, great. Oh, you have a squirter. Does he have a gun in his hand? Oh, just light him up. And we've all seen the videos where they can do that. Whereas when you're dealing with us judicially, it's a very different kind of atmosphere, right? So, and don't forget, if we're working in our hemisphere, then the politics of this changes drastically. Whereas if we're in the sandbox and we're dealing with it, it's kind of removed from us. When everyone says, well, it's Tadshitistan, we don't really care, and their neighbors is, Shitistan, we don't care about them either. Well, we care what Colombia thinks in the end. We care what Panama thinks. We care what Mexico thinks. All these things are a lot closer to home, and that has a real ripple effect for us.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you put yourself in a cartel leader's shoes, what's the biggest kind of shift in your behavior that's going to take place if your organization is now designated as a narco-terrorist organization by the U.S. government?
I would do exactly what Chapo's son did. Turn yourself in.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you are going to make an end.
Wow.
And Mencho with the CJ&G, the Cartel Jalisco, he is looking at his end is coming. And like I said, you can leave in a box, or you can leave with the hope that maybe you would get out of jail at some point and actually enjoy the last decade, 20 years of your life as an old man.
Wow.
Because it's not going to end well for him.
In that same vein, Mexico, has been as big or bigger, arguably, of a player of, the institutionalization of the trafficking of narcotics in the United States. I've seen a lot of reports of, whether it's government entities of all different sorts aiding in that and almost, aiding and abetting in that. That's another topic. But why have we, from your perspective, done what we've done in Venezuela before doing it in Mexico, who borders our entire southern part of the country?
It's low-hanging fruit. So the operation we did in Venezuela, by no means was an easy operation. Very complex, very different. But compared to what we're facing in Mexico, because Mexico is going to be more of like a guerrilla warfare kind of environment. So I don't care how big and bad you are. I don't care what kind of unit you're going in there. This was a precision event in Venezuela that had a specific goal in mind. It was limited in scope. It was done in a matter of an hour and a half, 2 hours, and out, right? With the pressure applied. In Mexico, it's a very different situation. We have all of the states in Mexico, every one of them is touched by narcotics at some level, but it's much more than that. We have the border states. We have all of the families that cross the border. The economy is dependent both in the U.S. and Mexico, even though their government in complicity, total complicity, participation, if you will, with the narcos, and the flow of fentanyl from China has killed over 1 million of our people, okay? The reason why we can't go in is because of the proximity to the U.S., the potential dangers of what's going to happen when we go in. The dynamics are a very different dynamic from an economic factor, even though Venezuela has oil and all that stuff. When you look at Mexico, tourism, agriculture, I mean, not only that, aerospace industry, people don't realize the manufacturing vehicles and aerospace is massive, massive. We have air conditioner factories down there that are made. We have a lot of dependent factors, not just in the petroleum field, right? So to go into Mexico, and every time you go in and you take out one guy, and this is happening in Mexico now, we have such a splintered cartel faction. We don't have 2 or 3, 4 or 5 major cartels. Now we have all of these little cartels that are all splintered off, and it's going to be a real mess.
Yeah. Is it fair to assume then that it would be more destabilizing for us to impose aggressive action in Mexico than continuing to show restraint at this point?
I think the best way to handle Mexico in some fashion is going to be tactical operations to eliminate or capture certain people. But the problem is going to be retaliatory factors. They're going to take whole hostages, the towns and little pueblos and things like that. They're going to take them all hostage. They're going to kill civilians. These people are like ISIS in our hemisphere. They're that bad. I mean, they will kill everyone. They will torture. They'll video it. They'll do propaganda. They do it now, right? So that's going to be the biggest challenge. And right now, I think the administration is saying, okay, you know what? Let's make some demonstrations of what we're capable of. Let's posture up, and then let's see what Sheinbaum, the president, who is complicit as they come in every level of the drug trade, basically as the leader of the country, and her party and everyone underneath her. And I mean, don't forget, we had General Cienfuegos that DEA brought up and arrested. He was an Army general, totally complicit. And Trump sent him back. Take him out. DOJ, remove the charges, put him on a plane, send him back to Mexico.
Why?
Because it's too risky to destabilize Mexico. And the contacts that he had, the way that operation was done, which I won't get into because I was privy of some of it, was not done totally proper. And there was no criminal activity or anything like that. It was more of a procedural. And I think instead of dealing with the blowback, which was going to be massive, because this guy was at the top levels of the Mexican government, now retired, but still extremely valuable to the government of Mexico. And they put him back. And then, as Trump does so often, he's very good at this because he understands, coming from New York, now you owe me a favor. And I'm going to call you on that favor. And it's going to be a massive favor. I will call, and I want it when it comes. So, and that's geopolitics. That's what geopolitics is.
Yeah. What does a worst case scenario look like to you from a U.S.-Mexican cartel conflict standpoint look like?
Yeah, it's going to be asymmetrical, and a lot of it is going to be the kidnapping, killing, the massive homicides, the propaganda that they're going to put up, because we don't have to be worried about an offensive from the Mexican military coming to the U.S. I mean, their Navy is just like maybe 2 steps above Bass Pro Shops. I mean, it's just not there, right?
Yeah.
And that's not to detract from, the patriotism and the effort and everything they have, but they don't have it. Their Air Force, I mean, we probably have more air assets in MacDill than they have in their whole country, right? So their special operations guys, they got some really hardcore guys, but they are not the level of the team guys we have and the Delta guys and PJs, and they don't have the technology. They don't have that high level of skill that no one in the world can match. They don't have it. So that's not the concern. It's the asymmetrical, where they're going to come in, and we see this right now in cities. Okay, I've seen it.
Yeah,
they come in, kidnap and kill, torture, and then they fly back. I had one case where we had these guys, we arrested them, but they wouldn't hold them. And then we let them go, and the guy's like, "Don't let me go. Put me in jail." No, we're not doing it. The prosecutor said, "We're not holding you." They were begging us to keep them in jail because they think we get out, they're going to think we're ratting, we're dead. And he was right. 2 days later, garbage bags with chopped up body parts were left out by the house.
Wow. Is there a most likely unintended consequence of the path that we're currently on from your perspective?
Well, we're going to have that unintended consequence when a new leader is voted in. So, as with anything in American politics, the pendulum is always swinging. And when Trump leaves, and we're going to find out in the midterms what the tone and tenor of our what we're doing in the future is going to be, and if we see a sweeping change to the left again, that overture for what we're going to have in the future, that's where we're going to see more consequences. And I say see consequences. Right now, we might see them, but no one cares about them, right? We're going to do what we're going to do. We're not asking permission, nor should we in many cases, but we should have a careful consideration and adaptation to what we're doing in our country. Of course we should. We should care what the European Union thinks to an extent, but that doesn't mean they dictate what we're doing. But in any relationship, especially in geopolitics, you're going to have, you have to have this consideration. And right now, we're in the phase of President 47, and he's going to do whatever he wants, which is great. But when we have President 48,
depending
and
on who
it's a
48.
Biden, oh, we're so sorry.
Gavin Newsom.
Chocolate chip.
Yeah.
Then what do we do?
Yeah. What haven't I asked you about Venezuela and your experiences there that I should have?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I want to focus on is there are so many people working across every level of the U.S. government, civilians, analysts, agents, and not one single person is responsible for this. These are groups of people over decades of time to accomplish what was accomplished, to give the information to the guys that were going to go in and make this happen. And you have the intel guys on the mill side, you have the operators, you have all the aviation, maritime, everything. And I think a lot of people, when you see the videos and the photos of all the agents, I mean, they were taking so many photos and videos and selfies. And, next thing I thought they're going to be in flip-flops on the beach with, Mai Tais in their hand, taking a selfie. It was a little bit too much for me. But when you see these guys in uniforms and all that stuff, many of those guys, not all of them obviously, had nothing to do with the case in Venezuela, right? I want people to look behind the curtain at the people that were really, really putting themselves out at risk. Yeah, was I there? Yes. Was I doing it? I was one of dozens and dozens. When I left, there was another guy there that took my place, right? There was a guy there that was with me, TDY, for the beginning of it. I don't talk about their names, as I talked about and all these things. But the FBI guys that were helping me, the HSI guys that were helping me, the assets that were there, the people that lost their lives, assets that I had that were killed, assets that I had that had to be removed out of the country, right? And it takes, I always say this, it takes a village, right? Just like anything, to put all these things together. So, you know, the U.S. government has what it takes to do anything that we want to do. And the American people can know and be proud, like, maybe you don't like what we're doing, but when the time comes and someone gives the call to muster up and get it done, our U.S. government can beat anyone in the world, and we will beat them, and we do it for them. And all these men and women risk themselves and sacrifice their lives for it. That's what I want people to really understand. Amen. And the military too.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you saying that for sure, because that's, I think, you know, lost on a lot of people that maybe don't agree with the action itself. But, you know, it almost kind of reminds me of, you know, like being a parent sometimes, that not to call, you know, the collective U.S. citizen children, but, you know, when there's an element of a lot of information that you're unaware of, and most specifically to the danger, it's like, you know, the kid wants to go play in traffic and the parent understands, hey, that's not a good idea, and you may not understand why, you know, there is an element of that to it, I think. I'm curious if you saw the picture of Maduro wearing a blue Origin hoodie. Did you see that by chance?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. I am curious, do you think any of your guys got in trouble for doing that?
I doubt it.
Yeah, that's
I
cool.
doubt it. You know,
I mean, it was cool to see. I was surprised. It was like, that's ballsy.
Yeah.
Of them to do that. I could see, you know, at least, you know, some factions of the government that I've seen would fire people for doing something like that.
Yeah.
But
no, I don't think in this atmosphere right now of what's going on that's the case.
Yeah.
But I do really, truly, wholeheartedly believe that when you have something so monumental as this, and for me, I worked on it a long time, it's very personal. You know, I could have been killed there. I had a contract. I had to put my family through a lot, had to hide out, you know, all the things that go along with those things. And other people too, the importance of doing something proper and right, and making sure that things are done in a manner that's going to be demonstrating to the world, like, hey, you know, the operators that did this thing, they did their job. We didn't see anyone taking selfies or grandstanding, nothing, right? We didn't see anything. We didn't even hear from anyone, because these guys are real pros. Yeah. So when we bring him into court and we bring him in and all this other stuff, okay, the bosses want to get their pictures with him and all that stuff. For me, in my idea, it's not about the bosses. For me, it's about the guys that did that job. Bring them in. Let them do that. The bosses can be at the press conference. The boss could do whatever, you know, but that's just my personal thing. I wouldn't have done that, because leadership is about rewarding those guys and letting them know, all these guys and gals that did this job, that actually were involved in that case, you know, to put them front and center. That's just mine. And I'm not saying what they did was wrong, being there or anything like that. I get it. You know, it's a monumental occasion. But, you know, it's critically important to demonstrate to the world these things. Everyone in the world was watching this.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself. Beyond Blurry Lines, tell us about what that's all about.
So, you know, I wrote it again, and I wrote it again, and wrote it again. It's kind of like a chronicle of my life. It has a lot of details when I was a police officer, details when I was paralyzed. A drunk driver in 2001 paralyzed me. And little beknownst to me, he was actually using an alias name. He absconded for 23 years after I retired. He came in and he got probation because he was, you know, growing up.
Statute of limitations thing?
No, not at all. No, he had a warrant. He actually had the warrant for him. So they had already charged him, but he had over 300 alias names, and he had used one of those 300 alias names. They didn't even check. They bungled the whole investigation. He disappeared, lived his whole life. I get a phone call from a prosecutor a few years after. He's like, "You really want to follow through with him?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do. Actually, he paralyzed me. You know, I was in you know, the middle of the best part of my career with DEA. I was 31 years old, prime of my life, and then this guy. And then when I went to court and they gave him probation, I was just like, you got to be kidding me. Minnesota, by the way. He was not Somalian. But so it goes through that, and it goes through why I joined DEA, things I went through with DEA, the paralysis to overcome. So it's kind of like an autobiography in a sense, you know.
Yeah. Which reminds me, I encourage anybody listening to check out episode 255, where we kind of walk through your chronological timeline of your career and life story and everything. So I hope that it matches well with the book.
No, thank you, and for having me back. It's a real, as you could tell, I'm very passionate about what Venezuela means to the USG and the U.S. public at large, what we went through, and who worked on all this. It just means a lot to me to see the culmination of everything, and the fact that Trump actually ordered it to take place is just pretty gutsy.
Amen. Absolutely. Amazing insight, Wes. I appreciate you coming
Thanks.
back and sharing all of it. It's been a real treat for me to be able to ask you all these questions that I know are front of mind for a lot of folks. So it gave me a lot of context and backstory on Venezuela, historically speaking, and puts a lot of things in perspective. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. To the viewer/listener, I hope you enjoyed it. Good news is if you didn't, you can choke yourself. And until next time, this is Mic Drop.